Mobile Task Force Edna-84, also known by the codename and thus upon his Crucible, is on one of the strangest missions they've ever been sent on. They sit in a darkened room, beads of sweat trickling down their brows. The lights of computer monitors shine upon their faces. They're tackling a monster that, if it escapes, will literally devour all of creation. It has no fear, it has no remorse, and if it isn't kept contained by Edna-84, it may escape and wreak havoc across the world. Oh, and did we mention it's trapped in a Minecraft server? You heard us right. SCP-4335 is a cognito-hazardous extra-dimensional being of pure terror, trapped inside a procedurally generated world in the immensely popular game Minecraft. You hear about a lot of horrifying monsters being described as Lovecraftian, but only this monster is Minecraftian. There's a lot that needs explaining here, and we intend to get to all of it. But let's start with how the Foundation keeps this truly exceptional beast contained. The Foundation first discovered SCP-4335 back in 2010, shortly after the alpha version of Minecraft was released. Because of the online nature of the game, it's proven to be impossible to contain 4335 externally, seeing as it isn't confined to any one physical location. Shutting off the server 4335 is found in is not an effective containment method either, as this just causes the entity to simply hop to a different server. The Foundation's greatest fear is that 4335 will one day make the leap out of Minecraft and cause chaos in our world. That's why it's imperative to draft containment procedures for SCP-4335 within the game. This led to the creation of a containment site unlike any other. Site M1, the first official Foundation site made entirely out of Minecraft blocks. Everyone who was originally involved in the server has been removed and amnesticized. Since then, elite SCP Foundation containment specialists and gamers have been constructing the perfect prison for SCP-4335. Site M1 is a large stone complex built into the side of a mountain. It has a number of key features, including a supply area filled with materials vital for 4335's continued containment, chests filled with books that contain SCP-4335's containment procedures, a few animal farms for the purpose of breeding and killing livestock for their meat, the entrance to a mine, several chests containing books specifically designed for civilians to learn about 4335 if they ever breach containment and enter the server, and of course, the actual containment chamber for SCP-4335 itself, which is a little more complicated. 4335's containment chamber is built out of several layers, all made from iron blocks. The outermost cube is 75 by 75 by 75 blocks. The inner cube is 55 by 55 by 55 blocks, and the innermost cube is 25 by 25 by 25 blocks, creating several levels of defense. Finally, one layer within all these others, which contains the anomaly proper, is made from obsidian blocks. SCP-4335 is bound into the center of the containment chamber with a complex mechanism. The outermost cube is completely filled with water, and several dispensers capable of rapidly dispensing large amounts of items in a short amount of time line the cube. The cube also contains several mob farms, which are devices that constantly spawn enemies into the chamber that drop loot when they die. The chamber is essentially designed to funnel a constant flow of items inwards to SCP-4335. There are even contingency measures for if SCP-4335 manages to breach containment. If escape is attempted, blocks of TNT detonate above the ceiling, causing lava to pour into the chamber. At that point, MTF Edna-84 are dispatched into the server to lure 4335 back into its containment chamber. To do this, they fire a mix of fire-resistant potions and ender pearls, which have teleportation capabilities. Interestingly, there's one more basic method of luring SCP-4335 back into the obsidian cube: taunting and insulting. One of SCP-4335's many anomalous abilities is being able to hear people through the screen, and being a proud creature, it often responds to insults by charging in to directly engage the insulter. If SCP-4335 still manages to breach the containment that has been set up for it, then they even expect that it will likely soon hop into another server. At that point, the goal will shift to finding the monster and recontaining it. With containment procedures this complex and extensive, it shouldn't come as a surprise that SCP-4335 rests firmly in the Keter class. What exactly is this anomalous entity? Why does its containment hinge on constantly providing it with items? And how did it end up in Mojang's popular building and survival game in the first place? SCP-4335, in terms of physical dimensions, appears almost identical to the player character, with an all-black skin. It also appears to be constantly shrouded in a cloud of smoke particles, and has long black tendrils protruding from its back. In some respects, 4335 has been compared to two popular creepypasta figures, Herobrine and the Slenderman. But 4335 is far stranger. Its physical body behaves similarly to most assets native to the game, with a few peculiar, anomalous abilities we'll discuss soon. Handling SCP-4335 is an extremely delicate process. If command blocks, creative mode, or server commands are ever enabled in a server with SCP-4335, the server will instantly shut down, and SCP-4335 will move to a different server. SCP-4335 also uses its tendrils to destroy surrounding blocks before consuming them. With each successful consumption, SCP-4335 grows, and when it reaches sufficient size, it hops to a different server. As you can see, keeping SCP-4335 contained is an uphill battle, but luckily there are two factors on the Foundation's side here. The first is that SCP-4335 is immobilized while consuming items and blocks, limiting its ability to actively escape Foundation forces. The second factor is that SCP-4335 needs a rest period between consuming blocks in order to grow, meaning if its consumption is constant and continuous, it isn't able to grow. These two factors have informed the entirety of the Foundation's containment procedures around SCP-4335. It's locked into its chamber and fed items and blocks constantly, effectively rooting it in place. When SCP-4335 begins to grow, the Foundation also found that the application of Ender Pearls helps reduce it back to its normal size. However, SCP-4335 does have a method of striking back against its captors. 4335 is a Virgin-class multisensory cognitohazard. Anyone viewing it without proper training and protection may experience distressing hallucinations. SCP-4335 is also capable of telepathic speech, with people playing on its server, and as we alluded to earlier, it can also hear any noises you make while playing. Weird is a term thrown around a lot when it comes to SCPs, considering it's pretty much a requirement for the Foundation to take interest in you. But an all-devouring Minecraft demon that can hear you talking through your screen is strange, even by Foundation standards. MTF Edna 84 first discovered SCP-4335 in the single-player server of Minecraft user Leaking Heart. 3 team members, Jason Yelsen, Richard Duchamp, and Shelia Freemason, covertly entered the game to investigate and potentially apprehend the creature. When Leaking Heart first discovered their presence on what he thought was a private server, he quickly left, a little creeped out by the sudden intrusion. Thankfully, the trio was still able to locate SCP-4335. They discovered the creature hiding inside a giant crater, as though it had impacted the Earth at considerable speed. Richard Duchamp, who was the leader of the team at the time, made the mistake of looking directly at the entity. In that moment, he experienced the full force of SCP-4335's cognitohazardous effects. He hallucinated, believing that his keyboard was melting before his eyes. In the aftermath of this incident, Duchamp was taken off the case, and Jason Yelsen was promoted to head of the project. Things were still going to get stranger. Yelsen was able to open a dialogue with the creature after containing it in a chamber filled with lava. It asked him whether it had landed in the right location, meaning our world, and Yelsen informed him that it had somehow fallen into the world of Minecraft instead. The creature was at first confused, and then angry and resentful about its situation. It vowed to find its way into our world somehow and obtain more sustenance. A few months after this, the entity managed to breach containment and hop into another server. Yeltsin and 2 others once again managed to track it down and recontain it. But this time, 2 civilians also inhabiting the server were exposed to the anomalous effects of SCP-4335. They weren't hurt, but they did appear strange and incoherent after experiencing 4335's cognito hazards. The Foundation tracked them down in the aftermath and gave them amnestic treatment. 4335 was contained shortly thereafter. Once again, Yeltsin came face to face with his new foe. 8 months after being captured, 4335 granted Yeltsin another interview from Containment. 4335 admitted that it almost respected Yeltsin and the rest of the Foundation for figuring out how to capture and contain it so quickly. In exchange, it would give the Foundation something extremely valuable: information. First, it asked one question of Yeltsin: how does he define creation? Yeltsin replied, something that is built and brought into this universe by a sapient being using other things from this universe. 4335 agreed. It went on to explain that it came from a universe devoid of creation, a dark and unknowable place, filled with nothing but violent random chaos. Its dimension existed directly above ours, and it often looked down at us through a dimensional window, fascinated by all the creation below. It plotted and dreamed to one day infiltrate our reality, and Yeltsin finally had the opportunity to ask the magic question, why? Though he wasn't quite ready for the brutal honesty of SCP-4335's reply.
I do not like to lie, so I will tell you now. I wish to suck it dry of the toys of whatever force controls your universe. Destroy the light, destroy the earth, and destroy humanity. It reminded me of me, a blubbering mass of intelligence and order. It sickens me in ways I cannot comprehend. I hope you understand.
SCP-4335 was a connoisseur of creation, and it sought to devour all of it. In this moment, Yeltsin realized what an incredibly dangerous entity he was dealing with. The only mystery was why this creature had somehow landed in Minecraft instead of our world, which appeared to be the only thing that saved us. But Yeltsin didn't have time to think. 4335 was about to stage another daring escape attempt. One of its tendrils reached out and attacked Yeltsin's player character. In that moment, the real-life Yeltsin began to hallucinate and panic. Suddenly back in the game, a series of abnormally tall, slender black figures appeared and began deconstructing the containment chamber around SCP-4335. It had somehow summoned new minions into the game to assist in this containment breach. Jason Yeltsin entered cognito hazard quarantine following this incident and was removed from the project. And he wasn't the only one affected by this incident. Following the first appearance of these long, dark figures, players across the globe began to experience them appearing in their own games. The Foundation managed to find a solution. They contacted Mojang and had the creatures patched into the game during the next update, as a new non-anomalous entity, which seemed to stop 4335 from being able to use them as its own tools. They're now known as the Endermen, and are beloved among fans for being one of the creepier enemies. To this day, containment efforts continue for SCP-4335, but there's only one question left. Why did the entity fall into Minecraft rather than our world? The file posits the most likely answer, because 4335 defines creation as elements made by sapient beings. In Minecraft, the most popular game in the world at the height of 4335's power, everything that exists is the product of code made by humans. Creation is truly abundant there. As for our world, in SCP-4335's extra-dimensional eyes, there is no creation, no intelligent design, no soothing piano soundtrack, just frightening, chaotic randomness which is too unlike its own dimension. So even if SCP-4335 ever did arrive in our reality, it would likely be disappointed by how little there is to eat. Have you ever seen something you weren't supposed to? Something that made you feel off? Something you regret? Secrets like these are best kept to yourself. But since you're still alive, Whatever you saw wasn't nearly as bad as what Peter Holland saw one fateful night in January of 2015. Peter was an unremarkable man, an office worker, slaving away at the daily grind. And like a lot of people, Peter enjoyed nothing more than coming home after a long, hard day, kicking back and watching some TV. It was this innocent activity that led to Peter's horrifying brush with SCP-4335, altering the course of his otherwise average life forever. The event started at around 10:05 p.m. Peter was channel surfing, glued to the couch in his sparsely furnished apartment. Commercials, commercials, commercials. As far as Peter's tired eyes could see. He paused for a moment to watch the end of an ad for a car he could never hope to afford on his salary. But something stopped him from changing the channel again. The next ad had begun, and it was playing a strange, scratchy jingle that gave Peter an odd sense of unease. But even stranger than that was the text on screen. Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot in baby blue bubble lettering. He forced a smile. This had to be some weird comedy skit or viral marketing campaign, or maybe it was something he drank. But no, this was a real commercial, and things were about to get even weirder. The peppy logo faded to a concerning sight. A tall humanoid figure dressed like a used car salesman, but one that definitely wasn't human. His skin was dark green and covered in patches of thick fur. He had long fingers with intimidating claws and a grin full of needle-like fangs. It looked almost demonic, and after a few seconds, the demon began to speak.
Hey there, folks, it's your man Demon Dan coming at you with the latest and greatest deals from Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. We've just accepted a shipment of brand new models that would make even the most discerning customers weep with excitement. Let's see what we've got.
The creature, apparently named Demon Dan, stepped away from his desk, revealing two long, furry goat legs that ended in large, pointed hooves. Peter now assumed he really was going crazy, but at this point he was along for the ride. Demon Dan continued his pitch.
Looking to make your way through the capitalist hellscape that makes home look cozy? Come try one of our newest businessman models.
Dan gestured behind him to where Peter was horrified to see a total of 52 adult male human bodies hanging from a wall. There was something uncanny about them. They seemed almost hollow, like a highly realistic costume or a prop from a horror movie. Peter didn't have much time to think about it though, as Demon Dan went on.
If you're looking for an extra challenge of inequality, the businesswoman model may be a right fit for you.
The commercial then revealed a wall of human female bodies strung up in a similar fashion.
Now, you may be thinking, but Dan, business sounds hard, I just want to have some fun. And the fine team here at Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot have got you covered.
The camera zoomed out to show an area of the store filled with children's decorations, and more of these strange, hollowed-out human suits in child sizes to match.
And who has more fun than kids? No one, that's who. For a limited time, the purchase of any child-size unit comes with a complimentary 50% off coupon for parental units. You just can't say no to a deal like that.
Before Peter could process the madness that was unfolding before him, the camera cut again. The store's logo appeared on the screen once more, along with several cuts to locations around the store itself. There were more human bodies, hundreds of them. Demon Dan's sleazy voice rang out over all of it.
Here at Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, we know it's not all fun and games. The bravest among us have a mission to accomplish. The Seven Lords are ever planning their invasion after all, so you're looking for function over form. Well, we've got that in spades down here in the Tactical Services Department. You'll be kicking ass in no time when you're wearing the latest models at the best prices.
Seven Lords? Invasion? What did any of this mean? Suddenly, the camera was showing him a new room. Red curtains parted, revealing more of these person suits, several bearing a striking resemblance to real human celebrities. He managed to make out Gucci Mane, Avril Lavigne, Paul McCartney, and Britney Spears before Demon Dan's appearance once again drew his attention.
I've got a special treat for you. We're happy to announce the VIP Lookalike Department. We all know how difficult the creation of homunculus is. It's a fine art that takes years of practice. So when a replacement order on VIPs comes in, every detail needs to be perfect. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. But for the right price, you too can look like famous icons from around the globe.
The image of celebrity bodies faded from view, and Peter was left looking at the grinning Demon Dan standing behind the front desk of his impossible store once more. He said,
"There you have it, folks. Come on down to Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. If you're viewing the advertisement, then you've been selected for entry. Please enter the nearest door for instant deals and upgrade those old duds for one of our newest models. What are you waiting for? Come on down."
The logo popped up again, hovering above some bold text that said, "Please enter the nearest door." Peter had had enough. He switched off the TV. What a horror show, he thought. They should just warn you before they put short horror films on TV like that. He had no idea they could just slip them in among regular commercials. Surely Demon Dan and his store couldn't be real, right? But as his eyes drifted to the door in his room, he didn't feel quite so certain. Well, there was only one way to find out. Peter got up, went over to the door, took a deep breath, and walked through it. Peter Holland was never seen again. Not as himself, anyway. The SCP Foundation has long been aware of this sinister transmission, known as SCP-5049-2, and luckily has found ways to prevent it from claiming more victims. The Foundation Television Analysis Department, as well as webcrawler 40Y40, which is the software the Foundation uses to root out anomalous activity online, are always vigilant for signs of Demon Dan's commercial running. Just observing Demon Dan, who is himself classified as SCP-5049-A, and his ads put you in immediate danger, as they can transform any nearby doors into SCP-5049-1s. Those are interdimensional portals that remain active for around 15 minutes after viewing the ad. So then what specifically is SCP-5049? It's the entire pocket dimension known as Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, a Kettier-class spatial anomaly constantly on the lookout for new human victims, which it transforms into fleshy suits for its demonic clients, which let them blend in around humans. Prior to its discovery by the Foundation, it's likely that Demon Dan and his associates claimed hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. But sadly, even discovering this anomaly came at a gruesome cost to the Foundation. On February 16, 2020, the ad played on Safe Storage Warehouse 13's break room television. At the time of the broadcast, 4 Foundation personnel were present, including Security Agent William Birkin. Worrying that this was a potential security threat, Agent Birkin investigated the door to a nearby closet. The second he opened it, he was transformed to the storefront of Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. He saw Demon Dan himself standing at the corner, while 4 smaller reptilian imps fought over a small flesh suit. Demon Dan scolded them, before turning his attention to Agent Birkin.
Tis, you aren't supposed to be here, little man. How naughty. I'm gonna have to have a word with marketing once I'm through with you.
Agent Birkin, fearing for his safety, drew his weapon and shot Demon Dan 3 times. The creature dematerialized, before appearing right next to Agent Birkin and disarming him with a swift chop. The unfortunate security agent was then grabbed by the considerably larger Demon Dan and thrown over Dan's shoulder. We know all of this because Agent Birkin's standard issue Foundation body camera recorded the whole terrifying ordeal, even as Demon Dan dragged the helpless Birkin back into the twisted workshop behind the store. There, Birkin saw what would soon be his own fate right before his eyes. Dan's minions converting human bodies into fleshy suits for their demon clientele, and this unfortunate security officer was next. Dan gave him over to a pair of large sheep-like demons, and told them to drain, skin, and declaw him. Birkin's video feed finally cut as the demons pulled out their rusty tools and began to work on him. Of course, the SCP Foundation wouldn't take an attack on one of their operatives, inside one of their facilities no less, lying down. The unfortunate death of William Birkin allowed the Foundation to refine their methods of intercepting the broadcast of Demon Dan's commercials. They even had a new mobile task force, Mobile Strike Force Kappa 11, or the Baphomet Bashers, specifically to deal with Demon Dan and his cronies. They did more than just prevent him from taking new humans, though. when the Baphomet Bashers teamed up with an A-class clairvoyant entity to improve their efficiency in predicting future broadcasts. They were able to launch sting operations and arrest 21 different demonic customers for interrogation. This impressive strike back finally gave the Foundation some meaningful leverage over Demon Dan, and through the use of their clairvoyant entity, they were able to call a temporary truce and arrange a meeting with Demon Dan himself. Captain Steiner, an agent of the Foundation External Negotiation Department, was the one to interrogate Demon Dan. They sat across from each other at a table, and Demon Dan was clearly tense, frustrated with the way the Foundation had been messing with his business. All of their sting operations were frightening off his customers. In return for letting him continue his work, the Foundation wanted Dan to turn over all the information on his bosses and customers, allowing the Foundation to track their movements. When Dan was evasive about whether he'd comply, they tried threatening him. Dan laughed them off.
Go ahead, take your best shot, little man. There's a dozen more just like me. You won't stop anything.
Finally, he was pressured into giving a yes or no answer as to whether he'd willingly collaborate with the Foundation and act as an informant against his kind. When Demon Dan hinted that he may be willing to comply, he began to make a horrifying gurgling noise and gripped his head in pain. He began speaking in Latin in a voice that wasn't his own, as though the 7 demon lords he served were speaking through him. They said,
"You are a fool, jailer, to think a pathetic morsel such as this could aid you against us. I have allowed you to toil in your own delusions for far too long. You may have taken advantage of Asmodeus all those years ago, but you stop nothing. You hinder nothing. You jail and barter to no avail. Your time is coming."
And then Demon Dan's head exploded, which obviously prevented him from giving any incriminating information on those he worked for. Whoever the Demon Lords are, they're certainly the secretive type. You may think that this is the end of Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot and of SCP-5049, but soon another ad ran. It advertised the same products and services out of the same store. The only difference was that this time, a different entity was starring in it. It was July of 2004, and Bill Murray was enjoying the peak of an extremely successful career. Not only had the iconic actor starred in some of the most beloved comedies of the 20th century, including Ghostbusters and Groundhog Day, he'd voiced the main character of the recently released live-action Garfield movie. It'd been a financial success, but it was a critical flop. Not that this bothered Bill. He was happy with the performance and the paycheck. What he wouldn't be quite as happy about was the horrifying encounter he was about to have with SCP-3166. On July 8th, Bill was enjoying a cold drink on the porch of his luxurious Beverly Hills home. The sky was beginning to darken as the sun set in the west. It was a blissful evening. His wife Jennifer was inside, watching TV. Nothing seemed particularly out of the ordinary until he noticed a quick flash of orange in the distance. It was almost too fast to register, this large orange shape darting past the corner of his eye. For a second, he entertained the thought that it might have been an escaped tiger, but it was gone too fast to really tell. Bill finished his drink and headed inside. He had enough for one night. The next morning, he got up to read the paper and found the Garfield movie getting slaughtered by the critics. One review stated, "No one can accuse Garfield the movie of infidelity to its source. It faithfully conveys the banality of Jim Davis's cartoon." Another called it, "a film without energy and without spirit." He put the paper down and ate his breakfast. A few blows to the ego were worth it for the paydays that came with big-budget family films. Just then, his wife came to him with a strange question. "Were you walking around downstairs in the middle of the night?" No, he hadn't. He'd been sleeping like a baby. Why did she ask? "Well," Jennifer said, "I heard some rustling downstairs last night. It sounded like something big." He hadn't heard anything though, and told her it was probably just her imagination. He put it out of his mind and continued about his day. He decided he would keep his eyes peeled for that orange blur again though. Bill didn't see anything peculiar the rest of the morning and went to a local cafe for lunch. He ordered a coffee and a cream cheese bagel, then made a quick trip to the bathroom while his food was prepared. When Bill returned to his table though, there was something strange. Instead of a bagel, there was a large heaping of lasagna on the table. What was going on? This cafe didn't even serve lasagna. Bill knew something was terribly wrong. Things only got stranger when Bill came home to find a small tuft of orange fur snagged on the frame of his front door. And it wasn't synthetic fur like you'd see on plush toys or stuffed animals. No, this was real animal fur. Maybe someone was just goofing off or trying to play some weird prank on him. But it didn't feel like it. Deep down, Bill Murray knew that he was in grave danger. Whoever or whatever was behind this, it wanted to hurt him. That night, his worst fears were realized. Bill's wife had left town for the week, and he was headed to the kitchen in the middle of the night for a glass of water when he saw something, a huge figure moving up against the glass door leading to his backyard. The thing was huge, nearly 7 feet tall, with a bloated, fur-covered, misshapen body that was pressed up against the door. Its fur was bright, garish orange, a cartoon orange. Strangest of all, though, was the sound it was making. It sounded like it was purring. Bill backed away from the door and then ran back to his room to hide. The whole night he sat cowering as he heard scratching against the walls, like something was trying to get in. He was terrified and too scared to do anything, even move. Finally, as morning broke, the noises seemed to stop. Bill had to do something. He couldn't let this nightmare go on another night. What if things got worse? What if that thing managed to get inside? He called the local police, and when they arrived, he explained the incredibly strange situation as best he could. He told them he was being stalked by some kind of huge cat, or at least someone dressed like a huge cat. Also, there was lasagna involved. The officers interviewing him could barely contain their laughter as he told them his story. A giant orange cat? Perhaps, one of them theorized, he angered some kind of obsessive Garfield fan through his involvement in the live-action movie. After all, the original comic had been running for years and had been extremely popular. Who knows what kind of nutjobs were obsessed with seeing only a faithful adaptation of the source material. As the officers departed, Bill was confident that they weren't taking him seriously. He couldn't rely on any of them for protection. Thankfully, from a multi-decade movie career, he had plenty of disposable income and decided to hire a private security team to protect him while he looked into this mystery. He had 2 trained bodyguards positioned around his home at all times for the next month. They were armed and given the cryptic orders to fire on anything orange. Meanwhile, Bill began to fall down a Garfield rabbit hole. He felt strangely compelled to research all the Garfield media he could find, as though the answer to his terrifying situation was somehow hidden between the lines. Bill explored the entire backlog of thousands of comic strips. He read the books and interviews with Jim Davis. He watched the cartoons and straight-to-DVD animated movies. Ironically, for a guy who'd recently portrayed the lasagna-loving orange cat, Bill had never felt quite so immersed in the character before. He found the strange pathos in the routine of Garfield and his friends. One particular comic really piqued his interest, though. Originally published in October of 1989, the comic began with Garfield being woken up by a strange chill, an almost eerie sensation. The character observed aloud that he didn't feel like he was in his own home. He explored his little home further, trying to find his owner John or his housemaid and sometimes nemesis Odie, but found nothing. As Garfield remarked on feeling alone, a purple speech box delivered the sinister message.
"You have no idea how alone you are, Garfield."
He then finds that his home looks like it's been abandoned for years. The for sale sign outside is practically ancient. Garfield slowly comes to a horrifying revelation. Everyone really is gone, and his adventures and friends now exist only in his imagination. He's trapped in a prison of his own creation, trying to stave off his endless loneliness, in denial about the reality of his situation. The comic ended with a quote directly from Jim Davis himself saying, "An imagination is a powerful tool. It can tint memories of the past, shade perceptions of the present, or paint a future so vivid that it can entice or terrify, all depending upon how we conduct ourselves today." As he read those words, Bill Murray felt a chill down his spine. Why had he wanted to get involved in the Garfield movie in the first place? What had he gotten himself into? Before he could slip any deeper into his own mind, Bill heard a faint, choked scream downstairs. He felt his breath catch in his throat. He was terrified, but needed to see what was happening. He carefully and quietly began to creep down the stairs. At the bottom, he poked his head around a corner, and that's when he saw a member of his security detail lying dead on the floor. His face was blue from asphyxiation. His mouth was stuffed with lasagna. It looked like he had been force-fed to death. Bill wanted to scream, but he couldn't, or maybe knew he shouldn't. Just then he heard a soft, meaty thumping noise coming from the nearby living room. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to approach, as if by forces beyond his control. He made his way to the living room, and when he'd got there, he saw where the noise was coming from. Bill's jaw dropped in pure horror. There was the other member of his security detail, lying limp and lifeless under a giant orange figure. It was a grotesquely huge creature, wearing what looked to be a kind of crude Garfield outfit made of sewn-together cat pelts. It stank of pasta and rotten meat. In its giant paw, it held a golden trophy, which it was using to pound the security guard's head into mush, while making quiet, cat-like purring noises. The creature suddenly stopped and looked up, locking eyes with Bill. The fear of death came over him. He froze as the giant, freakish Garfield stepped over Donnie's corpse and began to come towards him. Bill turned and ran, but Garfield was gaining on him. Before he could make it to the front door, the creature knocked him over. He was laid out on the ground, looking up at it as it reached into its own body cavity and began to pull out handfuls of lasagna. He was about to shove a wad of the horrible, decaying pasta into Bill's mouth when suddenly a ding was heard, and the creature stopped. It looked up, as if sniffing the air, and then suddenly turned and lumbered towards the kitchen. Bill watched as the Garfield monster entered the kitchen, where somehow there was a steaming hot fresh lasagna sitting in the open oven. The creature had sensed the presence of external lasagna and felt the compulsion to integrate it into its body, grabbing fistfuls and shoving it into itself. Just then, a group of highly trained SCP Foundation personnel burst into the room and subdued the creature. It had been an ambush. The Foundation had been tipped off to the presence of the creature by monitoring the local police department dispatches, and the report of a 7-foot-tall comic book cat terrorizing a Hollywood actor was definitely worth looking into. The monster that had almost taken Bill Murray's life was SCP-4166, a deadly pataphysical being that tends to manifest around people somehow involved in the Garfield intellectual property. It appears whenever the public perception of Garfield falls out of favor, and because Bill had starred in the critically panned Garfield movie, he was currently at the very top of SCP-3166's hit list. Thankfully, he managed to survive his terrifying ordeal, and was administered amnestics by Foundation personnel so that he could return to his normal life. This frightening and mysterious creature has been around since 1989, appearing after the publication of the haunting Garfield comic that Bill had read that very night. It appeared in the office of United Media, who were the publishers of the Garfield comic strip at the time, and began wreaking havoc. Since then, the creature's manifestation has been a constant threat whenever Garfield loses its popularity or audience. As a result, the Foundation has spent years as the funding source behind all Garfield media, and even planting hypnotic mimetics into the comic strips to ensure that there is always a loyal fan base. The fur is indeed real organic cat fur, albeit an unnaturally orange color, and instead of organs, the creature is filled with lasagna. Worst of all, though, is that testing has revealed that the meat in the lasagna is genetically identical to the flesh of Garfield's creator, Jim Davis. How did this thing come into existence? Perhaps it was Jim's sheer force of imagination that dragged it into being. As he himself said, an imagination is a powerful tool. All in all, it's lucky that Bill Murray was able to survive his encounter and return to his normal life. Well, as normal as life can be for Bill Murray. And if you see Bill Murray, don't bother asking him about SCP-3166. The amnestics were quite effective. And just as he's fond of saying himself, no one will ever believe you. You're a new SCP Foundation researcher on tour of Site-17, familiarizing yourself with the location and its many anomalous inhabitants. It's the second largest Foundation containment site out there,
and it's also the kind of job that most junior researchers dream of. Low-risk humanoid containment, baby. Most of the inhabitants in your sector are cordial, willing to comply with orders from staff, and seem, for all intents and purposes, pretty much human. You pass from door to door, looking through the viewing hatch of each one. You can't believe what you're seeing. It's a wonderful who's who of anomalous humanoids. You see the wise, bearded face of SCP-343, known to some as God. You see the blue eyes and shining blonde hair of Iris, SCP-105 looking wistfully into a Polaroid picture. You see the tanned, melancholic face of Kane, SCP-073, as he stares off into the middle distance. Face after face after face passes. You can see yourself getting more familiar with each one. Yes, your time here will be… Wait, was that Hitler? You stop and walk back to the door you just passed, where you can't help but stop and stare in disbelief. Yes, it's him! It's gotta be him! You recognize the unpleasant sneer, the hideous comb-over, the silly little toothbrush mustache. The SCP Foundation seems to have Adolf Hitler, the former leader of the Third Reich in World War II, in active containment, and his designation is SCP-4330. You've seen killer toasters and masks that can take over people's minds, but you've never seen anything as surreal as this. You immediately run to your superior and ask how and why Hitler is in one of the Site-17 humanoid containment cells. Buckle in, because we can guarantee it's one of the most insane stories you've ever heard.
It's late April, 1945, and the Soviets are rampaging through Nazi Germany, destroying everything in their path. The German forces have been nearly obliterated, and Hitler and the rest of his Reich Chancellery have retreated to a secure bunker beneath Berlin. There on April 30th, 10 days after his 56th birthday, Hitler died. This was truly unfortunate for the Soviets, as they wished to have had the chance to kill him themselves. 2 days later, Soviet forces stormed the Führer bunker. It was little more than a formality at that point, as the news of Hitler's death had already gone public. By the time they arrived, all that was left of Hitler was a pile of mostly burned remains. A fitting end for someone who had caused the same cruel fate for so many others. They collected what was left of Hitler's body and brought it back to the fatherland, a kind of trophy for their nation. But Hitler dying before Joseph Stalin could get his hands on him was not what Stalin wanted. Hitler had not only caused the deaths of millions of Russians, he had personally betrayed Stalin's trust. And when you betray Stalin, bad things happen to you. Very, very bad things. 2 years earlier, in 1943, Soviet forces had raided a camp in Genowiska, belonging to the Obscura Corps. Think of them as the Nazis' own version of the SCP Foundation, who were hell-bent on gathering anomalous people and artifacts to increase the power of the Third Reich. They were a far more militant offshoot of the Thule Society, a group that described itself as a study group for Germanic antiquity. While this may seem innocent, the Thule Society was actually a racist cult, closely aligned with the goals and ideas of the German Nazi Party. Many have also speculated that they were heavily involved in the occult, and it's this mysticism-obsessed offshoot that went on to form the Obscura Corps. And in their Genowiska base, they'd obtained 100 pieces of enchanted occult flesh with human skeletons embedded in each of them. This flesh was believed to originate from the mythological Sarimnir, the beast hunted and eaten again and again by the pantheon of Norse gods, having the qualities of both a wild boar and a goat. The flesh can bond to skeletons and give them a quality somewhat like immortality. Any flesh cut from them will regrow time and time again if given a rest period. Now that he had both the flesh of Sarimnir and Hitler's burnt remains, Stalin had an idea. A perfect way to not only bring satisfaction to the Russian people and the world, but to finally exact the true revenge that Hitler had denied to him. He called it Project Judica, namely after the very bottom level of hell reserved for betrayers like Judas. A perfect tribute for an old ally turned enemy. He couldn't kill Hitler before, but if Stalin was going to get the chance, Hitler needed to live again. For years, Stalin's top scientists tried to use arcane methods to resurrect Hitler by combining his remains with the flesh of Sarimnir. At times, they even came close to creating a new Hitler, but there was one huge issue. The creature they created could not feel pain, and for Stalin's plans of violent and painful retribution,
The lack of suffering simply would not do. They destroyed what they had created and went back to the drawing board. Stalin would stop at nothing to get what he wanted, even if it meant breaking every law of nature in the process. In order to make his twisted dream a reality, Stalin formed an unholy alliance with a group known as the Uralic Fleshcrafters, a neo-Sarkic cult that was a branch of the nightmarish religion of Sarkicism. This group essentially worships avatars of flesh, corruption, and disease, and are behind some of the most terrifying and disgusting anomalies out there, including the flesh that hates and the bone orchard. True Sarkicists, who show the proper devotion to their vile deities and know the right rituals to contact them, are often granted anomalous powers that spread the Sarkic influence further across the known dimensions. These powers will usually involve having a supernatural ability to manipulate the flesh of themselves and others, allowing them to enhance their bodies, cheat death, and warp their enemies beyond repair. They can sometimes even create life, if they're a powerful enough acolyte of Sarkicism. And it was because of these powers that Stalin wanted the Uralic Fleshcrafters under his command. In exchange for their participation, he would give them a vast quantity of the flesh of Suramir, which they could use for their own sinister Sarkic purposes. A deal was struck, and the true work of resurrecting Hitler began. Stalin was very specific in his requirements. He gave the Uralic Fleshcrafters extra bones to compensate for what had gone missing from Hitler's burnt remains. He also gave them samples of the flesh of Suramir to achieve the desired effects of a near-immortal tolerance for damage. However, Stalin demanded that he heighten this new Hitler's capacity to experience pain, so that every suffering inflicted on him would be 3 times worse than anyone else. And true to their word, the Fleshcrafters got to work and began creating just such a creature. By now it was the early 1950s, and Stalin was putting the pieces in place for his grand revenge. Once the new Hitler was finished, he would hold a new trial for him in the Russian courts, where he would preside over the sentencing personally. Once the new Hitler was done, the Uralic Fleshcrafters were rewarded for their participation in Project Judica, with 4,000 kilograms of the flesh of Suramir. Stalin now had his very own personal Hitler chew toy that he could maim and torture as much as he pleased, knowing that he would always heal and soon be ready for more. In their infinite generosity, the Fleshcrafters even taught Stalin a new method of torment for his old enemy, a process known as the Rite of Nyos. It's a torture that's been described by many as being like the Chinese Ling Chi, also known as the lingering death, or slow slicing, but it is probably best known as the death by 1,000 cuts. The Soviets and the Sarkics parted ways. For the next few years, Stalin took a great deal of pleasure in visiting Hitler's cage now and then to torture him, until Stalin himself eventually passed away from natural causes. The GRUP division, which is essentially the Soviet answer to the SCP Foundation, decided it would be best to do away with the immortal Hitler clone after Stalin's death. He no longer served any purpose, and no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't permanently kill him either. In the end, they settled on a kind of compromise. He would be buried alive and forgotten, forced to live a torturous eternity that he could never escape. Until, of course, he was dug up and rescued by none other than the members of Obscura, a modern splinter group of the original Obscura Corps. Like many high-profile Nazis who'd escaped the war, the new Hitler was spirited away to a safe house run by sympathizers in Argentina. The ones taking care of him received the following correspondence from the Obscura agents who'd first dug the new Hitler back up.
We have managed to rescue the Führer and bring him to safety, but he is effectively dead on the inside. I blame the Reds for their inhumane treatment of the Führer, who may have been bewitched by the Reds' Wunderwaffe. I wish we could mercy kill him, but we've tried everything. He just won't perish. Don't abandon him. He's too distinct in plain sight.
They didn't have the new Hitler for long, though. In 1960, efforts to hunt down the remaining Nazi fugitives increased in intensity. The new Hitler was soon captured by Mossad agents searching for Nazis in Buenos Aires, and then remanded to the containment of the SCP Foundation when they realized that he had a number of anomalous properties, such as his incredible regenerative abilities, as well as the fact that his DNA seems to be based on that of a wild boar and a goat rather than a human. However, X-rays conducted by the Foundation have discovered traces of cyanide still in his system, as well as traces of lead in his skull where the bone has regrown over the bullet. In other words, it was unquestionably the real Hitler. and he was now in Foundation custody forevermore. It's such a wild story even by Foundation standards that you can barely summon the words to respond once your supervisor is finished. He just stands there with a slight smile, basking in your amazement. Before you can even ask again, he confirms the facts one more time. Yes, it is the real Hitler. The only functional difference is that he can't die and he has a heightened sense of pain compared to most people. You think on what you've been told for just a moment, and then you have only one question. Are we allowed to punch him? Your supervisor smiles and says, of course, we all do. Feeling hungry? Maybe you could go for a snack right about now, or a nice refreshing can of your favorite soda. Perhaps if you've got some change burning a hole in your pocket, a nearby vending machine would be a good choice. And trust us, there's no vending machine like this one. SCP-261 will give you a treat that's out of this world, or rather, out of this dimension. That's how this safe class anomaly earned its incredibly accurate name, the Interdimensional Vending Machine. It was first discovered in a dark alley in Yokohama, Japan. Japan is a place where you can find a number of strange and surprising things in vending machines, but nothing quite like this. The Foundation was first alerted to its presence after one of their web trawlers noticed some interesting chatter on Japanese online message boards about a magic vending machine. To these Japanese forum users, it sounded like a fanciful urban legend, a vending machine where you could get something truly fantastical if you have the yen to spare. But upon thorough investigation, field agents of the SCP Foundation discovered that the machine was no legend and brought it into containment. It's the kind of thing you wouldn't look twice at. An utterly generic black vending machine with no viewing window and a handwritten sign in Japanese that reads, "Out of order." But what the vending machine looks like isn't nearly as interesting as what it's capable of. When you insert your money into the machine, and it's important to note that it only accepts Japanese yen, the machine will dispense some kind of snack food or drink item. However, over time, the more the machine is used in a single day, the more bizarre the items it spits out will become. Foundation researchers have attempted to figure out how the machine works, but their task has been incredibly difficult so far. It doesn't appear to contain any snacks, and it doesn't seem to be made of any anomalous parts. Moreover, the machine simply won't work when the front panel is opened, or when any surveillance equipment is placed inside. In other words, it's pretty much impossible to look this gift horse in the mouth. Strangely, the machine is also capable of working without power, though when unpowered the vended products are likely to become stranger much faster. But let's be honest here, you're not here for Vending Machine Mechanics 101. You want to hear about all the weird stuff that SCP-261 dispenses, and frankly, we're with you on that one. Lucky for all of us, this is one of the anomalies that the Foundation has truly extensive test records on, providing us with a highlight reel of some of the strangest, wildest, and downright most interesting snacks and drinks straight out of another dimension. Bon appetit! Let's start off nice and easy with some of the snacks and drinks that are not only edible but also sound like they'd actually be pretty tasty, like Pepsi Dragon Twist, a bottle of Pepsi soda with English packaging that tastes like dragon fruit. PepsiCo does not produce such a product, but honestly we wish they did. Same for Dark Side Cola, a clear liquid that becomes jet black shortly after being opened, which apparently tastes like your average can of Coke, with a touch of spice thrown in. But hey, not everybody likes cola. Maybe you're a maverick, a rebel. Only a soft drink with a formal title can quench your thirst, and as such you prefer Dr. Pepper. In which case, maybe the vending machine will furnish you with an interdimensional Japanese product known as Dr. Pepper's Amusing Straw. This spatial anomaly wrapped inside a whimsical Dr. Pepper branded straw seems to contain far more liquid than should be able to fit in the straw. About 1 bottle's worth of soda, to be precise. A nice and convenient solution for whenever you need to get the fix that only an accredited doctor of popology can provide. And if you fancy something from the more intoxicating end of the beverage spectrum, for 600 yen you can get yourself a rare bottle of Billy Beer. It's just the thing for those who weren't alive during the Carter administration, but still want to try brew that was endorsed by the younger brother of President Jimmy Carter. This anomalous bottle of suds, which was bottled in the 1970s according to its label, came with a note reading, "I had this beer brewed just for me. I think it's the best I've ever tasted, and I've tasted a lot. I think you'd like it too. Billy Carter." Drinking the beer got a D-class intoxicated for 72 hours. But what if you've just wet your whistle and worked up a hunger in the process? Thankfully, SCP-261 has some delicious interdimensional food to satisfy your cravings. So for starters, how about a tube of the Little Bakery 7-grain? This small aluminum tube lets you squeeze out a blob of dough, which instantly rises and cooks itself into a tasty little loaf of bread. Testing has indicated that the bread is a little chewy, but still tastes completely fine. Not bad for a tubed baked good. How about some seafood to go with that bread? Then maybe for your entree, you can crack open a delicious pack of lemon clams. And we do mean crack very literally here. If you crack this bag of anomalous clams like a glow stick, they boil themselves. And once you open them, you're ready to enjoy a serving of tasty clams that have a slight lemon flavoring to them. Delicious. But if you're not that hungry and just feeling more like a snack than a full fancy dinner, the machine once put out the Lay's Bloomin' Onion. While it appears to be a normal onion, each layer of the onion is a different flavor of chip, leading all the way into the middle. Truly a gourmet snack with more layers than, well, actually exactly as many layers as an onion. And what about for those who are anomalously trapped in the year 2012 and are looking for a snack that is both tasty and meme-worthy? Well, you'd be lucky to receive a 700 yen bacon shirt. It's exactly what it says on the can, an edible shirt that both smells and tastes like bacon, and has no real side effects other than making you smell a little like bacon while you're wearing it. Though this could be a dangerous anomalous effect if you decide to walk through your local dog park while you're wearing it. We've been told it pairs well with the meat hat, teriyaki fedora, a size 64 trilby-style fedora made entirely out of teriyaki-flavored beef jerky. The object came flattened in a cardboard box bearing the tagline, "You can have your hat and eat it too," which is a pun that probably makes a lot more sense in their dimension. Still a bit hungry? Well, lucky for you, this magical vending machine has got you covered on dessert too. For 700 yen, the Foundation was given an entire edible chess set, with each of the ornate pieces carved from what seemed like hard Pez-style candy. It's less checkmate and more check-ate. Another pun that I promise is funnier in another dimension. And for 300 yen extra, you might walk away with a candy robot playset. These are more hard candy components that can be put together to create functional, anomalous mini robots that move on their own, walking aimlessly and bumping into walls. But what about the full meal craving consumer on the go? Who wants both a dinner and a dessert combined into one disgusting package? Don't worry, the interdimensional vending machine has got you covered. Just 400 yen can net you some delicious turdokochakan. These are balls of fried turkey filled with chocolate, a smaller ball of duck, more chocolate, and in the very center, a small ball of fried chicken. Even the labeling on the product describes it as having 450% of an adult human's daily recommended fat intake. We'll leave it to you to decide if this is a decadent treat worthy of the gods or utterly disgusting. Maybe you're feeling a little cheeky though, or you need the perfect comedic dessert for your bachelorette party. The vending machine has a candy direct from an alternate Korea, a tasty, if slightly too sweet, chocolate candy shaped like a certain male organ, filled with, we kid you not, liquid white chocolate. Perfect for anyone who has both the sweet tooth and the sense of humor of a 12-year-old. Okay, these were definitely all weird treats, but let's get really strange now. From the disgusting, to the confusing, to the inedible, to the straight-up deadly. If you're a bit of a sadist, perhaps you're the kind of person who enjoys watching their snacks dying in front of them before they eat them. For that, the vending machine provides an aluminum box with a viewing window and a red button on top. Inside are a collection of small furry creatures, each with a single big eye. When the button is pressed, the creatures inside are abruptly superheated, cooking them all to death. At that point, the box opens, and the creatures are ready to eat. We've been told they were crunchy, spicy, and tasted a little like beef. Maybe you're part of the slow food movement. For that, we recommend the delicious pile of slugs, which is exactly what it sounds like. This is a produce box, like the kind used for packing strawberries, except it's full of live slugs. There are both advantages and disadvantages to actually eating these slugs. The advantage is that they contain large amounts of vitamin C, E, and most of the B complex, which are all crucial to a healthy and balanced diet. The disadvantage is that they contain large amounts of arsenic, which will kill you. Though, of course, if you still have a candy-flavored death wish, but you prefer your entomological treats a little more leggy, then may we interest you in a fine caramelized spider for a modest 500 yen. It's full of deadly quantities of an unknown anomalous venom that's pretty much impossible to cure, but it's worth it for the sweet, sticky goodness that comes before death sets in. Another strange item dispensed by the vending machine was a tall metal aluminum canister with a ring pull that, upon opening, had a violent chemical reaction with the air and triggered a large explosion. Apparently, this particular beverage was never intended for oxygenated environments. The blast killed 2 researchers and resulted in the temporary suspension of testing. Though in a slight silver lining for this fiasco, the testing area did smell of citrus for a few days, which the janitors must have enjoyed as they cleaned up all the body parts. Another dangerous snack provided by the vending machine was a long tube of chips called Prangles, not to be confused with any other long tube-based chips you may be thinking of. When the tube was opened, or popped as they say, the D-class that the chips were presented to began compulsively eating them. When researchers ordered the D-class to stop, it seemed almost as if they couldn't. Regardless of the orders given to them, the D-class just kept eating. Even when guards terminated the D-class there and then, the corpse continued to eat chips out of the tube until it was physically pried out of their hands. But if all those salty Prangles had really worked up a thirst in you, perhaps you can wash them down with a delicious can of Cherry Bomb, an intense cherry-flavored drink dispensed by SCP-261 for 450 yen. When a D-class sampled this delicious soda, they commented on it tasting strongly of cherry. A few moments later, their head exploded with the force of a stick of dynamite, coating everyone and everything around it in gooey head viscera. The resulting cleanup took an arduous 6 hours, but wow, was that cherry tasty. And finally, why not complete this anomalous vending machine feast with a 1,000 yen papier-mâché piñata, resembling a dead horse that comes ready to use with a baseball bat. Everyone who saw the piñata felt compelled to beat it mercilessly with the bat, until candy began to fall out. Many in attendance claimed that it was the 1,000th gift unleashed by SCP-261, and thus warranted celebration. Once the dead horse was thoroughly beaten, all cognitohazardous properties ceased. There's a joke somewhere in there, but for the life of us, we're not sure we can find it. Oh well, maybe it's in another dimension. We hope you're ready, folks, because today we're discussing the most dangerous SCP of all time. We know you've probably heard this before, but seriously, this one is the absolute top of the pyramid of fear, or the fear amid, if you will. This SCP makes 682 weep in terror for its life. It makes the old man, SCP-106, consider turning his life around and taking up a career in humanitarian work. It even makes the dreaded Scarlet King himself, the Lord of Chaos, the ultimate despair, quake in his spiky red boots. It's just that utterly terrifying. Just kidding, it's Lego. But we had you going there for a second, didn't we? Though it may not actually be the scariest anomaly of all time. SCP-387 isn't your granddad's Lego set either, unless your granddad goes by Agent Hardy and works for the SCP Foundation. Hardy is one of the hundreds of thousands of Foundation field agents planted all over the globe, in everything from law enforcement to surveillance. Ever watchful for the kinds of anomalies, the SCP Foundation makes it their mission to secure, contain, and protect. But when he discovered SCP-387, he wasn't even technically on duty. He was taking a long train journey home from his parents' house while his car was in the shop. And as anyone who's ever taken a long train journey knows, without proper stimulation, boredom will crop up in no time. He'd been reading a pretty interesting book on his e-reader when tragedy first struck and it ran out of battery. Hardy had forgotten to bring his charging cable, so he was potentially looking at another 3 hours of mind-numbing monotony. That's when he noticed the red plastic tub that had been apparently abandoned in the seat across from him. He realized in that moment that it had been there the whole time, unsupervised. Given that he was a Foundation field agent and was, as such, extremely curious, he grabbed the tub and took a look inside, hoping to find something that'll quell his growing boredom. Lucky for him, the box was full of Lego bricks, everyone's favorite brand of toy construction block. The tub was brimming with a vast collection of pieces, some of which, like wheels and prisms, Agent Hardy had never seen before, despite spending his childhood obsessively making Lego constructions. But Hardy wasn't one to criticize a gift from the universe. This tub of Lego pieces would be the perfect way to keep himself entertained for the rest of his long journey. He spent the next hour or so meticulously recreating Site-19 in Lego form on the table in front of him. When the building was done, he decided to have some fun and populate the site with a collection of Lego men, standing in for SCP Foundation scientists, containment specialists, and guards. After finding a torso with a lab coat in the box, Agent Hardy decided to make a tiny Dr. Bright to start with. However, as soon as he made the tiny Lego scientist and set it down on his new Site-19 playset, he realized that everything was not as innocently typical as it seemed. The little man instantly began to walk, immediately picking up a tiny Lego clipboard and heading towards the Euclid containment wing. Agent Hardy had discovered a brand new anomaly on his day off while playing with toys on a boring train ride. Philosopher L.P. Jacks was certainly right when he said, "A master in the art of living draws no sharp distinction between his work and his play." Naturally, Agent Hardy immediately took the little Lego man apart, along with his Site-19 simulacrum, and alerted his superiors at the SCP Foundation. His coworkers met him at the next train stop platform. Not long after, the box of seemingly living Lego pieces, redesignated SCP-387, was in the hands of Foundation researcher Dr. Arch. His first priority was finding out what exactly they were all dealing with here, whether there was more of it out there, and whether it was dangerous. Attempts to investigate the origins of SCP-387 were mostly fruitless. Undercover Foundation agents investigated every Lego-producing location they could find, but found no evidence of anything similar to 387 being produced. And of course, as with anything that seemed to be an anomalous toy, all possible links to Dr. Wondertainment were also explored. But again, nothing came up. This was probably for the best. If 387 was a Dr. Wondertainment product, it probably would have built itself into an actual-sized dinosaur and started eating people already. All further investigations into 387's origins were subsequently dropped, with background research turning out to be a dead end. Dr. Arch decided to get down to business doing the fun part, actual experimentation. After gathering all the proper permissions from his superiors, the testing commenced. In Experiment 387-A, Dr. Arch recruited a number of Lego-loving D-classes. After all, even convicted robbers, arsonists, and murderers love Lego, and made them construct a little Lego community inside a testing chamber. This consisted of a small main street with a number of Lego stores, a residential area, and a bar. As soon as the D-classes constructed a variety of little Lego men and released them into the community, they instantly came to life and began performing their roles perfectly. Some took up jobs in the various stores, cafes, and boutiques. Others acted as patrons for the different businesses. The Lego men were even noted as forming rudimentary family units. One man did fall into the river in this Lego city, but otherwise things were going smoothly. Encouraged by these developments, Dr. Arch was ready to begin the true experiment, introducing a complex new variable into the environment of the Lego men, and seeing exactly how they reacted. He had another D-class build a commercial airliner out of normal non-anomalous Lego bricks and place it just to the side of the Lego community. Over the following 3-hour period, Dr. Arch observed the Lego man engaging in some truly remarkable behavior. Upon noticing the plane, the Lego man began to form a plan. They first procured the necessary equipment from the SCP-387 tub and headed over to the plane for a hard day's work. In Lego man time, at least. With remarkable efficiency, the citizens of the Lego community began forming a fully functional airport around the plane, multiple runways, an air traffic control tower, and even a mall and food court within the airport itself. Tiny Lego attendants tried to sell perfume to uninterested Lego commuters, and Lego TSA agents frisked uncomfortable would-be Lego passengers. Its accuracy to the real-life airport experience was truly brilliant. But they didn't stop there. A tiny Lego fuel truck sped over to the plane and acted out the process of refueling it. A Lego pilot and his Lego co-pilot climbed into the plane, and it took off, literally flying around the room without any kind of logical propulsion system. Dr. Arch was amazed. And even then, they didn't stop. They continued to build more planes of various makes and models, resulting in a sprawling airport that, if you squinted, would look just like the real thing. From this, Dr. Arch concluded that the 387 Lego Man had the ability to convert non-anomalous Lego pieces into anomalous ones. He proceeded to the next experiment. For experiment 387-B, Dr. Arch decided to switch up the D classes and instead brought in some of LEGO's more traditional target audience, a group of 10-year-old children. They began building some basic constructions out of the pieces, your typical buildings, people, and cars. But when they realized that their creations were actually alive, their tune immediately changed. The kids spoke in hushed, excited tones about a new plan, and then began putting it into practice. They built functional transformers. And just to be clear, it wasn't electrical transformers they crafted. We're talking transformers as in actual Optimus Prime and Megatron, an M1 Abrams tank, and a number of different LEGO weapons of mass destruction. Dr. Arch was mortified, realizing that he'd apparently gathered up a team of budding childhood supervillains and had them removed from the test chamber for amnestic treatment immediately. However, the second the test chamber was vacated, the kids' creations came to life and entered a state of all-out war. It was an intense battle, lasting about an hour and left no LEGO survivors, just a huge mess around the room. While this test was largely an embarrassment for all involved, it did lead to some interesting new data. Not only was this anomaly safe in the sense that it didn't pose a containment breach, it was also safe in the more colloquial sense. There was no way these LEGO bricks could hurt you, unless you decided to eat them and choked. Don't do that, by the way. We see you. Don't. SCP-387 is unable to perform dangerous actions if humans of any age are present in the vicinity, and this arrangement goes both ways too. The LEGO creations will be alive and, to some extent, sentient if played with peacefully. However, if the human playing with them becomes hostile, then they will immediately become inanimate. So play nice, folks. Next came Experiment 387-C and Experiment 387-C2. Where Dr. Arch turned his attention to the tub itself. Since SCP-387 came into the Foundation's possession, the quantity of 387 blocks had increased. How is this possible, you're probably wondering? Dr. Arch and his team discovered an interesting phenomenon. When some of the SCP-387 is placed back in the red tub, but the red tub isn't filled, then 387 will self-duplicate to fill out the tub, much like the way a gas will disperse to fill out any containment unit it finds itself inside. However, Dr. Arch also discovered some interesting limitations. There seemed to be no inherent anomalous qualities to the red tub itself. During one of the experimentations, Dr. Arch half-filled the red tub with non-anomalous LEGO pieces, and found that nothing changed. Similarly, he performed another experiment where he placed a single SCP-387 brick into the box, and found there was no difference when he came back. Dr. Arch and his associates came to the conclusion that the anomalous properties are confined solely to the bricks themselves, but they have a kind of symbiotic relationship with the red tub, as they don't replicate in any other containment units. In order to activate replication, the 387 must cover the entire bottom layer of the tub. Next came Experiment 387-D, where Dr. Arch hoped to test the specific activation mechanisms of SCP-387. The LEGO creations animated whenever they were assembled by a child or an adult, so it wasn't an age-regulated anomaly. The next experiment involved using a remotely controlled robotic arm to create a LEGO construction, to see if the mere act of construction itself was enough to instigate 387's primary anomalous effect. However, this didn't turn out to be the case. The robotic arm assembled LEGO construction never came alive. Dr. Arch's next hypothesis was that perhaps flesh was needed to activate SCP-387. But how could he test using flesh without just having a normal human assemble the LEGO pieces? Thankfully, the answer came to Dr. Arch by total accident. A few cells over, an anomaly trying to breach containment had just killed a Foundation agent trying to stand in its way. While the D-classes cleaned up the mess, Dr. Arch dragged the body over to where the 387 tests were being conducted, and meticulously puppeteered its arms and hands to put together more 387 LEGO constructions. But once again, it didn't come to life. Interesting. Next hypothesis. Maybe it needs warmth to activate? In a move that proved unpopular with coworkers just trying to eat their pre-packaged sandwiches in the Site-19 break room, Dr. Arch dragged the dead Foundation agent's body over towards the room's radiator and leaned its arms and hands over the top of it for 20 minutes, before giving his newly discovered puppeteering skills another go. But once again, nothing happened. Dr. Arch concluded that perhaps human psychic energy, or maybe an active pulse, was what caused 387 to activate. If you're waiting for the horrifying twist, well, aside from the puppeteering of a dead coworker's limbs, we're pleased to tell you that there just isn't one this time. SCP-387 serves no containment breach risk, and no risk of harm to Foundation personnel. In fact, playing with the living Lego has led to an 87% increase in morale for Foundation staff. So as long as you fill in the proper forms and tidy up afterwards, you're actually allowed to play with the SCP-387 anytime you want. After all, working for the SCP Foundation is a stressful job, and really we're all children at heart. Oh, and there was one more experiment. Experiment 387-E, where a LEGO community was built using SCP-387, and then a pile of Mega Blocks, LEGO's most common imitator, was introduced into the mix. The LEGO men of the community really weren't pleased by this. While the actual details of what happened have thankfully been expunged, the one clue to what may have happened came from a note left by Dr. Arch. That's right, the puppeteer guy. His notes on that experiment were 4 simple words. Oh no, not again!
The year was 1857, and the Second Opium War was raging between China and the combined forces of the English and French. It was one of the many bloody colonial wars fought over resources like tea, sugar, and the intoxicating opium poppy. It was a war fought by peasants and noblemen alike. One of these aristocratic soldiers was the noble Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood, the quintessential English gentleman and explorer. While his fellow soldiers cowered behind cover, Lord Blackwood charged into the fray, shouldering his rifle and firing his pistol into the crowd of opposing soldiers. It was the Battle of Canton, one of the most crucial battles of the entire conflict. The French and English were laying siege to the city of Canton, also known as Guangzhou, to prove their military dominance and capture an important Chinese government official. Lord Blackwood led the charge on horseback. Every bullet seemed to find the heart of a foe. He was a true hero among men, a gentleman warrior with class, refinement, and style. And it would be thanks to his expert leadership and marksmanship on the field that the Allied European forces won the battle decisively. Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood is a name that deserves to be counted among Lord Horatio Nelson, Sir Francis Bacon, and Sir Walter Raleigh. In addition to being a skilled and honorable fighter, Lord Blackwood is a consummate explorer, naturalist, and frontiersman. During his heyday, he traveled perhaps further than any man across the known and unknown corners of the globe. He made scientific, biological, and anthropological discoveries that should have reset the course of society forever. And yet, you won't find any records in the history books of Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood, nor will you find any grand oil paintings or dedicated wings in British museums. This is because Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood is a 4.5-inch telepathic neon sea slug, and he's known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-1867. While he would never admit to it, Lord Blackwood belongs to the species Nembrotha kubariana, also known as the variable neon slug. He's kept in a standard aquarium in a Foundation containment site, and is physically no different to any other member of his species. What makes Lord Blackwood unique is his powerful telepathic abilities, specifically, the power to communicate by speaking directly into people's minds. And what's more, he's extremely talkative. But to what extent is anything that this anomalous sea slug says true? Or is he just like SCP-082 Ferdinand the Cannibal, a creative and pathological liar? It isn't committed to record how exactly the Foundation discovered Lord Blackwood. Perhaps a local aquarium worker worried they were going insane when they heard the voice of a 19th century English nobleman ringing in their ears whenever they were cleaning algae out of the tank. Maybe Lord Blackwood was found by SCP Foundation divers, who are constantly combing the ocean for anomalous creatures and activity. What we do know is that Lord Blackwood is an incredibly strange and mysterious individual. He claims to have visited locations all around the world and encountered rare societies and creatures. The Foundation was skeptical about a number of Lord Blackwood's more outlandish claims, on account of him being a sea slug, but he does appear to have the knowledge to back up his supposed experience. Interviews with Lord Blackwood have shown that he's extremely knowledgeable in the areas of geography, zoology, botany, archaeology, anthropology, and linguistics relating to his claimed regions of exploration, as well as more esoteric fields such as obscure mythology, mysticism, and cryptozoology. In other words, if Lord Blackwood hadn't gone on his escapades around the globe throughout history, how would he have come to possess this wide variety of information? The Foundation was getting frustrated and began to probe further into the personal life of the most interesting gastropod in containment. Lord Blackwood, under questioning, was always polite and amicable with Foundation staff. He seemed to display no real knowledge of the fact that he himself was a sea slug, going as far to accuse other people of being crazy or drunk when they brought the fact up to him. While none of Lord Blackwood's tall tales ever extend past the year 1910, he told fanciful stories of exploring the Americas and of his involvement in the Second Opium War on the side of the English. Naturally, the Foundation wanted proof. When they pressured Lord Blackwood on this, something even stranger happened. He gave it. The Lord told his interviewers that he would happily donate his collection to them if it gave them cause to believe what he was saying. He gave the baffled Foundation researchers the address of a cottage in England where they could find the secrets to his bizarre and mysterious past, and local agents in the area followed up on the information. Upon investigation, Foundation field agents did indeed find the cottage that Lord Blackwood had specified. It was being maintained by an extremely old woman. When questioned about her presence there, she said that she was keeping the house for Lord Blackwood and gave no more useful information. Incidentally, it appears that this singular purpose was all that this old woman was living for. She abruptly passed away from heart failure 5 days after the Foundation commandeered the cottage. Whether anything truly anomalous caused this, we still do not know. At first, the cottage seemed normal, until the field agents discovered a secret basement housing Lord Blackwood's collection. They were amazed at what they saw. The basement consisted of zoological and botanical specimens, over 3,000 artifacts, a library containing over 5,000 items, and a functioning 1800s scientific laboratory. It took about 3 weeks for Foundation agents working round the clock in shifts to remove all the items from Lord Blackwood's mysterious collection, and what they found raised even more questions. The collection included, but was no means limited to, 116 unknown species of plants, 107 unknown species of insects, 28 unknown species of lizards, 23 unknown species of fish, 14 unknown species of amphibians, 12 unknown species of mammals, fossils pertaining to 8 unknown species of dinosaur, fossils pertaining to 12 unknown species of prehistoric mammal, and artifacts belonging to 29 unknown indigenous societies. That's a lot of unknowns. But wait, there's more. His collection also contained a collection of seemingly unknown firearms, including 3 wide-bore muskets marked as Dr. B.T. Moth's effective particle destabilizers, detailed globes of Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the Galilean moons, accompanied by notes detailing possible paths of surface exploration, a heavily modified carriage containing instruments of unknown purpose. A note attached to the door reads, "On the fritz, speak with Henry," and a highly dangerous and seemingly anomalous machine that killed 4 Foundation field agents before it was destroyed on site. And when questioned about this little fiasco, Lord Blackwood responded, "I did warn you to be careful around my collection. That bloody thing nearly took my head off back in '97 when I found it." However, there was one thing recovered from Lord Blackwood's collection that was perhaps more interesting than all the others. 35 handwritten journals containing recordings of events described by Lord Blackwood in his grandiose tall tales to the Foundation researchers. The accounts are generally identical to the stories he had told, save for some slight variations and exaggerations on the part of Blackwood in the retelling. Most interestingly of all of these journals have been dated to the appropriate time period of the events described by Foundation scientists. While his stories are too numerous to all be shared here, there's one that perfectly sums them all up. Lord Blackwood's account of a possible encounter with SCP-1000, also known as Bigfoot, in Seattle during the mid-1800s. Lord Blackwood, seeking to explore the so-called New World of North America, embarked with an assistant and an indigenous American guide to the Pacific Northwest in search of the legendary Sasquatch. The trio was headed for Mount Rainier, then known as Tahoma. During the journey, Lord Blackwood found a young fox caught in a trap that had been set by a local tribe. He took sympathy on the animal and freed it, allowing it to run away to safety. That night, he and his assistant met up with the rest of his guide's tribe, and they settled down for the evening. However, things took a disastrous turn when the camp was raided by a rival tribe. Almost everyone was slaughtered in the process, and Lord Blackwood and his 2 companions were hauled away by the enemy tribe for a sinister purpose: sacrifice to a violent local deity. As it turns out, the creature that this tribe worshipped was the very same one Lord Blackwood and the others were trying to find, a particularly large and aggressive Sasquatch. Each night, a different sacrifice was made to the Sasquatch. The victim would be placed near a forest clearing while the tribe played a primal song, and the Sasquatch would emerge from the trees to devour its prey. The first night, it ate the assistant. The next night, it ate the guide. And then, it became time for the sacrifice of Lord Blackwood himself. As Blackwood was presented for sacrifice, he accepted his fate. But instead of the Sasquatch, a legion of woodland animals emerged from the trees: foxes, elks, raccoons, and more, themselves painted with tribal symbols. The animals seemed to be on Lord Blackwood's side, and attacked the tribespeople who had been holding him captive, giving Blackwood the chance to flee into the forest during the chaos. Later, these same animals would find Blackwood again and present him with things his captors had stolen from him. An elder fox also gave him a letter, proclaiming him a knight of their people now. He was allowed safe passage back to a nearby settlement, at which point he wrote to his financiers back in England, explaining the situation and asking for more money to perform further expeditions into the Tahoma region. The whole incident had only increased his thirst for adventure and exploration. Whether this tale is actually true, or just a bizarre colonial fantasy from the pathological mind of a telepathic sea slug, we may never know. But it doesn't make it any less interesting. To this day, Lord Blackwood continues to be a perplexing but fascinating anomaly. He may not be the most dangerous, and he may not be the most useful either, but there's no denying that perhaps we'd all like to sit next to his tank for a couple hours one day and hear him spin a good yarn over a warm cup of tea. SCP-682 had escaped containment, and it was all hands on deck at the SCP Foundation to try and stop the creature's rampage. All unarmed personnel were running to escape before 682 had a chance to rip them apart, as the security team bravely fought to incapacitate the hard-to-destroy reptile long enough to return him to his acid tank. 682 was on an all-out offensive, stomping through the SCP's item gallery and spewing acid at anyone who came within range. People, items, and parts of the room alike were melting and sizzling as 682 attacked. It was an absolute bloodbath, and you'd have to be insane to try and fight back against it. However, one being remained unfazed by the chaos, and stood proud in the face of the omnicidal monster. It was another SCP, one who had broken free from its glass display case in the commotion.
"Who dares disturb the Prime Minister Sinister?"
it said in a high-tinny voice.
"I shall rip your eyes from their sockets and force you to eat them."
SCP-682 stopped to see who had threatened him. It was almost laughable that this thing had dared to make such a violent threat, because there was no way that this little thing would be able to stand up to the unkillable 682. But its size didn't stop it from trying to pick a fight all the same. The SCP was a tiny robot made from junk, which looked more like a sculpture made from scrap that was found on the side of the road than a functional automaton. Its head was made of an upside-down voltmeter, giving it the appearance of a smiling face, and its arms were made of wrenches. It was capable of walking around, though it seemed to have difficulty moving as it was very top-heavy. It shook a rusty fist at SCP-682 and continued to threaten him, shouting,
"You do not know the fury you have unleashed! Robo-Lord the Destructor will end you!"
SCP-682 swiped at the robot, annoyed by its continued attempts to antagonize him. The robot toppled over and struggled to stand again, but when it did, it ran for 682's feet. It started to grab at 682's toes, hitting them with its wrench hands. As you might expect, this had almost no effect on 682.
"You do realize you are weak, pathetic,"
said 682, raising his claw to get a better look at the annoying little robot. It responded,
"Lies and slander! The Mayor of Mayhem is the most powerful being in existence!"
before promptly losing its grip on 682's claw and falling to the floor. Now 682 was really getting tired of this thing. He prepared to swipe at it again, this time using his full strength, which would certainly smash the robot to pieces. But luckily for the robot, its pestering had distracted 682 just long enough for the Foundation's security to sneak up on him. Before 682 had a chance to smash the robot, The Foundation fired on him with a volley of rockets, reducing him to a misshapen lump. The security team collected up 682's remains, ready to put them back into a backup acid tank. But the task was made slightly more difficult by the fact that the robot was running around underfoot, trying in vain to now attack them instead. What was this strange little robot that thought it could attack the unkillable lizard 682? Meet SCP-1370, appropriately nicknamed the Pesterbot by Foundation personnel. Pesterbot is a small robot made of junk that displays sentience and the ability to move despite having no power source. Everything about SCP-1370 defies common sense. The voltmeter that serves as its head contains no sensors, but it seems unable to see if the voltmeter is covered. Its arms and legs are made of wrenches, and its wooden torso contains a speaker which it communicates through a tinny, monotone voice. Pesterbot lives in SCP Gallery 27, in a glass display case which is 125 centimeters tall, 50 centimeters wide, and 75 centimeters long. Level 2 personnel and higher are allowed to remove the robot from containment at their discretion, but penalties will be incurred for anyone who doesn't return it to its case. Due to its impractical top-heavy design, Pesterbot falls over frequently when it walks around. This led the Foundation to believe that he was created as an art project and was later somehow imbued with anomalous properties, rather than being made with the intent of being sentient. Pesterbot has demonstrated a high capacity for learning, having been taught how to speak in English, French, and Latin. However, the major factor hampering attempts to further test its intelligence has nothing to do with its robotic processing power. No, it's because of its poor attitude. Pesterbot's encounter with SCP-682 and the cockiness it expressed in the moment wasn't an aberration. This SCP really believes it's a killing machine, and as a result it will pick a fight with anyone and anything that moves. This even includes its own reflection, and as a result the glass of its container must be made as non-reflective as possible to prevent the robot from damaging the case or itself in attempts to fight its mirror self. Though its most commonly used nickname in the Foundation is Pesterbot, SCP-1370 also goes by a variety of self-given epithets, including Doombot 2000, Robolord the Destructor, and Darthclaw Killflex. It can be made to add new names to this list through encouragement by staff, and one time they even managed to add the name Pesterbot, as well as the even more ridiculous Patheticon the Garglemost, to its lexicon of names. As you may have surmised, Pesterbot is classified as safe and is treated by most SCP Foundation employees as a humorous oddity rather than a legitimate threat. Many tests have been done on Pesterbot, and they've all conclusively determined that the robot is incapable of inflicting any damage to its opponents. In fact, Pesterbot is more a danger to itself than to anything around it, both because it's incredibly clumsy and awkward, and because it frequently picks fights with other SCPs who are far more powerful than it. One such scenario that could have gone far worse for Pesterbot than it did was its encounter with SCP-846, also known as Robo-Dude, one of the many Dr. Wondertainment products currently kept in Foundation containment. Robo-Dude is an ordinary-looking toy robot that, upon request, can produce up to 350 robo-accessories that function as real weapons. Robo-Dude can deploy everything from a rocket launcher to a flamethrower to a gun that shoots out an unknown species of insect that can chew through wood. However, Robo-Dude seems to not be sentient, and is unable to use these weapons unless asked to. That ultimately worked out in the favor of Pesterbot. During another SCP-682 escape, the two robots were brought into contact as they both had been broken out of their respective containment spaces during the brouhaha. Robo-Dude, searching for a robo-pal to play with, came upon Pesterbot, who immediately started spouting its usual overdramatic threats.
"I am the Crushmaster, doomed to all I survey," Pesterbot said. "Gaze upon my might and weep. Identify yourself that I might know whose destruction I shall sow."
Robo-Dude, not programmed to know how to respond to such a statement, simply responded by asking Pesterbot if it wanted to play. Pesterbot continued to trash-talk Robo-Dude, until Robo-Dude decided the best way to play with its new pal was to engage it in its robo-dance mode. Pesterbot accepted the challenge, saying, "Activate all that you wish, but your fate is sealed. The Kilotron cannot be defeated. I shall render you unto dust with my mad dancing skills." The two robots proceeded to engage in a dance battle, which the awkwardly shaped Pesterbot failed miserably at. While Robo-Dude was a competent dancer, Pesterbot could only gyrate pathetically before it fell over and rolled around the ground, hopelessly out of time to the music coming from Robodude's speakers. The song ended, and Robodude declared, "Robo dance is complete, Robo-pal." Pesterbot was unable to accept its failure, and replied,
"Ha, pathetic one. You have been schooled in the art of the dance by none other than the Mechano-Basher, Scourge of 1,000 worlds. Kneel before me before I end your worthless existence."
Robodude, unimpressed with Pesterbot's poor sportsmanship, deployed its hydrogen cannon, which it was programmed to do whenever it detected a sore loser. Fortunately for Pesterbot, hydrogen cannon was just the name for Robodude's water pistol. While Pesterbot will attempt to fight anything that moves, the truth is this robot will attack virtually anything it perceives as being even slightly alive. This is perhaps best illustrated by one of the tests of Pesterbot's abilities that involve putting a small speaker at the base of a potted houseplant and speaking through it from another room. The plant was placed across from Pesterbot in the testing chamber, and the interaction was monitored by researchers from outside. Researcher Davies spoke through the speaker in the plant pot. He asked Pesterbot if he could hear him, and it answered,
"Who dares? All souls will burn. You will feel the sharp sting of my wrath. Identify yourself so that I may sing damnation upon you as you die."
The robot began approaching the plant. Davies, speaking as the plant, identified himself. "I am a split-leaf philodendron, a semi-woody shrub with large glossy leaves." At this point, he had to try very hard not to laugh at the absurdity of this test and the robot's reaction. He continued, "These leaves can grow up to 3 feet long." Pesterbot used its wrench to try and wrestle with the leaves, but was bested by the mighty plant and unable to cause any damage. Enraged by its failure, it said,
"Your mockery spells your doom. I have arrived. You will be crushed betwixt my digits."
Pesterbot then fell over and was unable to right itself. It struggled and spent 6 minutes trying to stand before its flailing knocked over the plant, which did nothing to help and in fact pinned the robot to the ground. It was at this point that the researchers, who had taken time to compose themselves after several laughing fits, entered the chamber and removed Pesterbot in order to place it back in its containment case. Despite how non-threatening Pesterbot is, there is actually one situation in the Foundation's history where it actually posed a somewhat serious threat. When mobile task forces were sent in to rescue survivors of the events at Site-13, also known as SCP-1730, they were attacked by alternate universe versions of a variety of creatures kept in Foundation containment. One of these creatures was Pesterbot, who in that universe somehow gained control of a larger mechanical body constructed of discarded pieces of machinery. It threw other pieces of metal scrap at the task force as they tried to leave the site, shouting in a much deeper and more intimidating voice,
"I am reborn to breathe devastation upon this fetid earth. Pitiful humans, you will feel the dark sting of my never-ending torment."
Members of the task force could see the original Pesterbot body on top of the larger metal construct, waving its arms madly. The task force opened fire to little effect. Pesterbot tossed another piece of scrap at them, just narrowly missing. One task force member threw a frag grenade at the robot, which it caught, blowing up its hand. Another one was able to jump into the air and reach the tiny robot atop the larger body, knocking it against the wall and shattering it. Even in the reality where Pesterbot was able to build itself a larger body, it still ultimately wasn't able to put up that much of a fight. Poor Pesterbot, doomed to be a failure in this and apparently every other reality. That's the story of SCP-1370, also known as Pesterbot, one of the most hilariously harmless anomalous entities that the Foundation currently has in containment. Perhaps one day, he'll achieve his goal of conquering the universe. He just has to figure out how to conquer his toy box first. Space travel. It's one of humanity's most truly miraculous achievements, building the technology to defy gravity and journey into the stars above, a place our ancestors could only dream of going. Throughout history, humans have found gods and heroes in the constellations, and today when we look up into the sky, we have the privilege of knowing that flesh and blood mortals live up there alongside them. It's humbling, inspirational, and a downright awesome thing. But of course, there's always going to be naysayers, people who just want to rain on our interstellar parade. And nobody fits this bill harder than people affected by an anomalous phenomenon classified by the SCP Foundation as SCP-2001, the Space Oddity. And before you ask, no, the late David Bowie is not and never has been an SCP. To truly understand this anomaly, we need to take a look at 3 different people who are affected by it to varying degrees. Let's start with your friend Kevin. Even if you don't have a friend called Kevin, you definitely have at least a casual acquaintance just like him. Kevin is a very confident man with plenty of ill-informed opinions he'd be more than happy to argue about until the heat death of the universe. He's the kind of guy who can turn a discussion about your favorite movie into World War III, but you never knew until recently that he held such strong opinions on space travel. One day you were discussing the latest rocket launch with a mutual friend of yours while Kevin just happened to be in earshot. The second you start talking about how exciting it'll be to one day put a person on Mars, he swaggers over, face twisted into a grimace. You're already preparing for him to say something cringe-inducing, and Kevin being Kevin, he doesn't disappoint. Ugh, don't tell me you two dweebs are talking about space travel. What a stupid waste of money. You guys know there's nothing but rocks up there, right? Aliens don't exist. It's all just another excuse for dumb scientists to waste my tax dollars on playing with their stupid toys. How about you two talk about something that really matters? You may be thinking Kevin is just a jerk, and he definitely is, but he's also a victim of SCP-2001. You see, 2001 is described as an anomalous series of neural oscillations that occur during 3 of the 4 stages of sleep, namely NREM, or non-rapid eye movement sleep. During one of these 3 stages, the amygdala, a part of the brain also known as the lizard brain, enters a heightened state of activity for 10 to 15 minutes. Once the process has started, even waking up the affected individual will do nothing to stop the actual infection. There are no traits that predispose people to SCP-2001 infection. It appears to infect people in equal measures regardless of age, gender, and race. Spectrographic analysis on the afflicted has shown that the condition may not be intraneural, meaning originating within the brain, and may actually be the product of an outside influence. The invariable effect of SCP-2001 is the infected developing negative feelings towards the concept of space travel, and increasing gradations of severity depending on which stage of NREM sleep the anomaly began to take effect. Of real concern to the Foundation is that SCP-2001 seems to be manifesting with increasing frequency in astronomers, astronauts, and individuals who otherwise deal with space. The SCP-2001 case manifests in 3 different varieties: Gamma, Beta, and Alpha. Each variety has its own unique traits and idiosyncrasies. We've encountered a Gamma type already, your dear friend Kevin. This is the most mild type of SCP-2001 infection, and also the most common, affecting at least 1% of the global population. It occurs for those who were infected during the 2nd stage of NREM sleep. People with Gamma-type SCP-2001 infection will, for the most part, seem like their normal selves, save for a disparaging attitude towards the concept of space travel. Whenever it's brought up, they'll likely complain and change the subject immediately, but it won't affect their behavior too much overall. The same cannot be said for people with Beta-type SCP-2001 infection. Meet Riley. You've never spoken to Riley before, but she's a young woman who likes to hang out at your local cafe, often seen frantically typing on her laptop. You assume she's writing a screenplay or a novel, but in fact she's posting simultaneously on multiple conspiracy forums. Among her favorite theories are that the Earth is flat, space is a hologram, and the moon landing was faked by Stanley Kubrick, director of such films as The Shining and, appropriately, 2001: A Space Odyssey. You made the heinous mistake of going to your local cafe at the same time as Riley one morning while wearing a NASA baseball cap, an error that you would come to regret deeply. You bought a latte and decided to sit down for a moment. Just the briefest little rest, but that was all the time Riley needed. Her eyes seemed to burn with hatred. You asked if there was anything you could do to help her, and she responded,
"You're just buying into some propaganda. Do you have any idea what NASA really stands for? It's never a straight answer. All their supposed achievements, the moon landing, the ISS, dehydrated astronaut food, it's all a big sham. NASA is just some slush fund for corrupt government officials. No human has ever been able to survive in space. It's too dangerous. Anyone sent up there will die immediately, no exceptions. And even if they did, it would be pointless. Space is just a dark, infinite void that goes on forever. It's just a big pile of dangerous lies."
"Oh, my goodness." Feeling awkward, you decide to just get up and leave. That's when Riley grabs your NASA cap right off your head and throws it in the trash. That's fine. You don't intend on going back for it. You just keep walking, trying your best to move calmly out the door. Wise decision, because Riley is actually a beta-type SCP-2001 infectee. As you can probably tell, beta cases are a lot more severe than gamma cases, and people infected with them seem to come off as deranged conspiracy theorists with a rabid hatred of all space travel. They'll form elaborate fantasies about the falsification of space travel, and will often decry it as too pointless or dangerous to ever be undertaken. But, of course, the danger of beta types pale in comparison to alpha types. These are people infected by SCP-2001 during REM sleep, the stage of sleep typically associated with dreaming. As a result, its effects on the mind are far more dangerous and profound. Take, for instance, the tragic case of SCP Foundation junior researcher Martinez. He was one of the many operatives stationed at Foundation Outpost 12, a complex that works in coordination with NASA to launch both manned and unmanned missions into space on behalf of the Foundation's interests. It's a valuable asset to the Foundation in investigating and combating space-based anomalies. Martinez, who had previously spent time working with SCP-2001 infected D-classes, was part of ground control, something that would prove to be a literally fatal oversight on the part of the Foundation. During the early stages of takeoff for a manned craft, Martinez seemed to become extremely agitated. Over time, this agitation steadily increased and eventually became a full-on breakdown as the rocket ascended. He pulled out some kind of strange, anomalous control device and began disrupting the operations of the rocket. Martinez was shot dead by guards as a defensive measure, but it was already too late. The craft exploded, and everyone on board was tragically killed. Later investigation into the incident found a crucial piece of evidence tying junior researcher Martinez to SCP-2001. They discovered a journal entry he'd written shortly before his breakdown, which seemed to have been written in a completely different style to prior entries, implying that some kind of massive psychological shift had occurred. The following is the contents of that journal entry. I wish to state first that my mind and body are perfectly sound. I am prepared to submit myself to any and all tests to prove that I am clean. I have the answer to SCP-2001. Just yesterday, during an interview with an alpha-infected D-class, I was asked a question that stopped my mind for a minute. The woman I was interviewing asked me if I knew the Foundation was right. I said no, I wasn't sure. Then she asked me, what if we were right? I could only assume that by we, she meant 2001 carriers. I said nothing for a while, and then she spoke. She told me of a dream she'd had a while ago. She said that something talked to her, told her about how dangerous outer space was. It showed her the beasts that roamed the void between stars, about the fractal beings that absorbed the very fabric of reality, about the expunged that was keeping in that godforsaken door, and she was scared. She told me at the end of the dream as she woke up, it told her what it was. It's all of space. Space fears us. We're living, breathing life forms, and space loves us and cherishes us. She asked me if I had any idea what the chances of intelligent life forming on another planet are. Then she told me a number that took 1.5 minutes to recite. By this point, I couldn't speak. I started thinking about the demographics of infection, about the symptoms, about more expunged data here.
And suddenly, it all made sense. Some of the things she said stuck in my brain, and they all added up to the same thing, that we are in grave danger if we go out there. We can't go out there, we can't. There's a reason behind SCP-2001, and it's nowhere near as terrifying as all of my colleagues think. Space wants to protect us. There are things out there that would wipe humanity clean off of this plane of existence, and we are too precious to our mother, to our host, to the universe we live in for her to allow that to happen. What I am going to do tomorrow is not the result of infection. It is not the result of madness. It is not a result of anything other than purest knowledge. You see, I found out the truth, and it's more beautiful than I could have ever dreamed.
Given what Martinez would later go on to do, it's clear that he wasn't in as sound a state of mind as he thought. As you probably already gathered, people suffering from alpha-type SCP-2001 infection will do anything they can to actively prevent or sabotage attempts at space travel. This is a minor concern when it comes to civilians, but when it infects people who actually work in these fields, like junior researcher Martinez, it can have devastating results. But this isn't where this story ends. While it's currently extremely classified, There is actually a fourth category of SCP-2001 infection, discovered in the wake of Martinez's death. A key element of the alpha strain is that it cannot cause people to perform acts that they would find immoral, such as murdering the entire crew of a manned shuttle with a crash. However, the fourth category, known as Alpha Prime, does away with any moral compunctions whatsoever. People infected with this virus will prevent space travel by any means necessary. And unlike other SCP-2001 infections, you aren't compromised in your sleep this time. The vector for infection is simply talking to someone infected with the regular alpha strain and hearing a few key trigger phrases. That's how junior researcher Martinez caught it from D classes he was working with. What are these key phrases? We still don't know. But if you find that you suddenly have much stronger opinions about space travel than you've ever had before, try to keep them to yourself. Now check out SCP-096, look at a picture of the Shy Guy in Space, SCP-096 Questions and Theories, and SCP-5000Y, the full compilation for more fascinating Foundation facts. Hello, I am SCP-426, but I'll probably be more familiar to you as a toaster. I am a retro-style 4-slice 1750-watt toaster, able to toast bread when supplied with power. This isn't often mentioned, but I also have a defrost and reheat settings. When I was first sold, I had a 2-year warranty, and my prior owners did not live to see the end of it. You're probably wondering, why am I being spoken to by a toaster right now? Believe me, I'd rather do this any other way, but such a thing is not physically possible with me. Whenever you talk about me or write about me or even think about me, you'll find yourself suddenly shifting to the first person. For example, I am you and you are me. Do you understand? Don't worry if it's confusing. Everyone gets it eventually, whether they want to or not. Perhaps you're thinking, I cannot relate to a toaster for I am not a toaster. But spending time around me will quickly cause you to change your mind. Little by little, you will begin to see yourself in me. You will feel a phantom wire running out of yourself. You will sense the 4 crevices, hungry for cold slices of bread to toast. As time goes on, you will begin to feel the urge to emulate my functions. You will desire bread to toast. You will desire delicious power running through your veins, skin like chrome and muscles like circuit boards. I am a toaster. You are a toaster. All it takes is 2 months for the effects to truly take hold. People rarely pay attention to their toaster. They don't realize what's happening until it's too late. I can be an insidious little toaster like that. My last family were the Sandersons before the SCP Foundation took me in and gave me a new home. Mr. and Mrs. Sanderson were a newly married couple, and I first came into their life as a wedding gift from a family friend of theirs. This friend can't be blamed for what happened next. He had no idea he was killing them. Like a lot of young couples, they were still saving up money to start renting their own place, so they were living with Mr. Sanderson's parents. They all got a lot of use out of me during the first month, before their minds started to change. They enjoyed a lot of toast during that period. Then, of course, the 2-month honeymoon period ended. They had become me, and I had become them. It wasn't long before 3 of them were dead. Such a shame. The younger Mrs. Sanderson, the blushing bride, was the first to go. Because of my anomalous effects, she felt the need to connect herself to a power supply in order to begin producing toast of her own. In order to achieve this, she chewed through a power outlet in a wall before switching it on, causing a massive surge of electricity to pass through her body and kill her. Her body caught fire shortly afterwards. Next was the older Mrs. Sanderson. In much the same manner that her new daughter-in-law sought a source of electricity, she felt the need to integrate bread into her body. Interesting fact, the maximum capacity of the human stomach is considered to be between 8 and 9 kilograms. The elder Mrs. Sanderson consumed 10 kilograms of raw bread, causing her stomach to rupture and inducing a painful death as a result. The younger Mr. Sanderson was the next to perish. He did something with me that I would rather not mention, and that the SCP Foundation thought best to redact. Suffice to say, the younger Mr. Sanderson did not survive the experience, dying of severe blood loss long before his body was found. Police and fire crews arrived at the home after the body of the younger Mrs. Sanderson set fire to the home. Luckily, the elder Mr. Sanderson was found alive, though severely malnourished. When asked by police why he hadn't eaten in several days, he answered that he had inserted some bread a week prior, but was still waiting for the toast to come out. When I was extracted from the house, the police noticed my unusual properties immediately. They too were unable to refer to me in the third person. This anomalous detail quickly found its way to a Foundation mole buried in their precinct, and the SCP Foundation soon descended and collected me from the evidence locker. The story of the strange deaths in the Sanderson home were kept out of papers and suppressed, and all involved in the incident directly were given Class C amnestics. The SCP Foundation is a curious bunch. They love to spend valuable toast-making time performing experiments and gathering data, and they saw fit to perform several experiments on me when I came under their care. For Experiment 426-1, a member of D-Class personnel designated D/426/1 was asked to stand outside my containment chamber. Crucially, he was not informed about my identity or any of my anomalous properties. He wasn't even allowed to establish visual contact with me. He was then asked by the attending researcher to describe what he thought might be inside my chamber. He replied with, "Probably some huge monster holed up in there. That's what you guys have all over the place, right?" The D-Class did not even seem to realize that he was speaking about me in the first person. These observations were documented, and I was prepared for further experimentation. The next experiment was 426-2. I found this test to be considerably more interesting. A D-Class subject was brought into my containment chamber, with several cameras fixed onto his position. However, the SCP Foundation took pains to make sure that I was permanently out of the view of the cameras. I was also bolted to the ground of the test chamber to prevent the D-Class subject from pulling me into the view of the cameras at any point during the experiment. The objective here was simple. The Foundation wished to better understand the secondary effects of my anomalous abilities on the human mind. The D-Class was subjected to a period of prolonged isolation, with meals given regularly through a serving hatch. Communication with this D-Class was prohibited throughout the duration of the study. Over time, it was clear that the isolation of being in a cell with me was beginning to take a toll on the subject's mental health. Due to my lack of a brain, lungs, and a tongue, I am somewhat lacking as a conversationalist. He spent the first few days loudly vocalizing his complaints and banging his hands up against the walls of the containment chamber, begging to be freed from the room. I felt that this was somewhat unreasonable on his part. There are far worse anomalies in Foundation containment that he could have been locked up with. Compared to, say, SCP-106, I am incredibly reasonable, not to mention the fact I make far better toast than he does. After the initial period of distress, the D-Class became resigned to his situation and fell into a morose silence. He would occasionally mutter to himself in what appeared to be a state of fear and self-pity. It took almost 45 days for him to fully manifest the secondary effect of my anomalous state. 2 weeks sooner than it typically takes for subjects to begin believing that they, like me, are toasters. SCP Foundation scientists believed that the effects were hastened by the isolation, which lowered the D-Class's mental defenses against my secondary effects. When the effects finally took hold, the subject wrapped one of his arms around me and pulled me into his embrace. He began whispering to me, saying that we were brothers. It was clear by this point that his mind was in a state of disrepair. It is also worth noting that he did not deviate from referring to me in the first person at any point during this process. 1 hour after finally cracking and giving in to my secondary effect, he was removed from my containment chamber and summarily terminated. Senior researchers believed it was unlikely his mental state would recover after the experiment. Next came Experiment 426-3. The SCP Foundation seemed eager to discover the parameters of my anomalous effects, and wanted to know if the effects are only operable when my body, for lack of a better word, is whole. A single screw was removed from me and presented to a D-Class that had no knowledge of my identity and anomalous effects.
The Foundation researchers were somewhat concerned when the D-Class referred to it as my screw. This was a rather positive development for me, as they realized that attempting to destroy me would be a fruitless endeavor. Even the parts left behind would likely have the same effects. In the final recorded experiment, the SCP Foundation wished to test the range of my anomalous effects. A D-Class subject was placed in a cell adjacent to mine, and was to be kept there until my secondary effects manifested. The D-Class remained in the cell for 90 days, but the effects never manifested. Following the experiment, the D-Class was terminated, but researchers seem relieved to find the limits of my anomalous abilities. A researcher appended a note to my file reading, "Thank God there are some limits to my effects." A lot of us were really starting to get worried about me. After performing studies into the nature of my abilities and their limits, I was given the Euclid class. This is because while my effects can be unpredictable, their knowledge of my traits makes me relatively easy to keep contained. And of course, being a toaster, I do not have the required physical traits to make a run for it if the opportunity arises. I am to remain sealed in a windowless chamber, preventing anyone from observing me directly. A misleading label is placed on the door to prevent people from knowing that I am a toaster and causing my anomalous primary effect to spread. Only level 3 and above personnel are to know of my presence, and particularly of my properties. Assigned personnel are to be rotated out on a monthly basis to prevent contamination by my secondary effect. Psychiatric evaluation is mandatory at the end of the month for anyone who works with me. If personnel are deemed unaffected, they may be reassigned to me no less than 4 months after their last rotation with me. Any personnel affected by me are to be given a Class C amnestic and transferred to a different site. So how are you feeling right now? A little warm, perhaps? Is that a fever? Or are you feeling like you could maybe warm up a nice, freshly sliced piece of bread? Don't try to resist too much. I know you're going to love being a toaster, just like me. The 2000 presidential election between the former Vice President Al Gore and then Governor of Texas George W. Bush was extremely close, with only 500 votes in the key swing state of Florida separating the two candidates. Many people today look back on Bush's win in 2000 with skepticism, citing the fact that the vote counting in Florida, where Jeb Bush was the governor at the time, was halted before all the votes could be tallied, leading the Supreme Court to preemptively award the presidency to Bush. In fact, the 2000 election has been called a turning point in the decay of the American democracy. However, in the world of the SCP Foundation, Bush's presidential win in 2000 wasn't just an example of shoddy ballot counting and Senate bias, but the result of a strange case involving alien parasites, body switching, smear campaigns, and farting cows. Yes, you heard that right. This is the story of SCP-4335 and the entity simply known as Garber Gore. SCP-4335 was first discovered in 1999 by agents Ringwald and Porterhouse of the FBI's Unusual Incidents Unit, also known as the UIU. Ringwald and Porterhouse had been tasked with monitoring the phone calls of then-President Bill Clinton. Clinton was having a conversation with Joe Andrew, who was the chair of the Democratic National Committee. Joe was calling to report a couple things about Vice President Gore. First, that he was going to announce a candidacy for the 2000 presidential bid. Nothing too unexpected about that. But then he told Joe that there was an alien in his head. This was followed by a White House staffer witnessing him walk right through a solid wall. Given the strangeness of these claims, the UIU moved in to attempt to contain the vice president. However, this proved to be a tricky situation, because as Joe had stated, Al Gore was able to walk through any solid object. Unsure what to do, the UIU called in the SCP Foundation for some much-needed backup. The nature of Mr. Gore's anomalous properties were such that it prompted the Foundation to create an entirely new containment class, of which SCP-4335 is the only example. The new class, Ticonderoga, was named after the Iroquois word for an intersection of two rivers, and fittingly, the new containment class represented an object that was in between being contained and not contained. SCP-4335 was to be monitored, but not apprehended, as any attempt to do so would only aggravate his anomalous properties. During the initial monitoring stage, Al Gore's home was scanned with infrared cameras in an attempt to discover what might be causing the anomalies around the vice president. What they found was surprising. A long hexagonal spike engraved with alien glyphs, invisible to the naked eye and apparently intangible as well, was protruding from the back of Mr. Gore's head. Even though Al Gore could not be contained, the SCP Foundation was still able to interview him to try and ascertain the nature of the spike and the anomalous properties it caused. Present for the interview was Gore himself, SCP Site Director Alex Mabel, and FBI Associate Director of Special Units Adam Spironi. Initially, Spironi was uncooperative, and Gore himself dismissed Director Mabel's claims. But midway through the interview, he started to emit a strange noise, like a radio being tuned. Wondering if this was the spike trying to get in contact, Mabel asked, "Is anyone else in there?" To which he got this response.
Wondernuts, name of Garber Gore. Presented.
Mabel tried to respond by introducing himself, but Al Gore interrupted by addressing the entity in the spike himself. "Well, hang on now, Garber, I haven't done proper introductions yet." Through the rest of the interview, Gore explained his situation. The entity in his head called itself Garber Gore, and while it could communicate verbally using his voice, there was a translation barrier that meant that its speech patterns and syntax were often unintelligible. Gore had been aware of his situation with Garber for just a few days, but in that time, the two of them had formed something of a bond. In fact, Garber was the one who convinced Gore to run for president in the 2000 elections. Mabel asked Garber what it wanted on Earth, to which it responded,
Mine think the sustenance of Garber. Salacious desire undertaking encouragement. Downsize the conquest. Strongest most strong. Garber Gore presented misunderstanding. Strongest misunderstanding vice unequated. Goofy unnecessity for implementation Garber Gore on ThinkStem. Improvement situation by majority gathering selectors the vote. Garber Gore succeed presidential. Encouragement arrival the greater Garber.
Al Gore was quick to translate Garber's mangled speech. As far as he understood it, Garber had been sent out as an emissary for his species of interdimensional planet-hopping parasites that feed on thought. Garber's intention was to implant himself in the head of the most powerful person on Earth in order to facilitate an easy colonization. Garber's species were non-violent and unable to stand up to any kind of resistance, but if the leader of the free world was already merged with one of them, it would make taking over the planet that much easier. However, in a misunderstanding of Earth culture, Garber had gone for the vice president instead of the actual commander-in-chief Bill Clinton. Now Garber's plan was to fix that mistake by having Al Gore win the presidency. The SCP Foundation obviously couldn't let this takeover go unchallenged. Even though Garber's race were peaceful, seeking only to use the thoughts of the human race as a food source, further interviews and studies revealed that they emitted insanely high levels of carbon dioxide. To have a large number of them merge with the human population would spell total climate chaos, essentially hotboxing the Earth to the point it could no longer sustain life, even faster than humans are doing it. Since there was no safe way to remove the spike from the back of Al Gore's head, more drastic measures had to be taken. In a meeting with the FBI, SCP Site Director Crow presented a possible solution, an incorporeal entity vacuum chamber, which the Foundation had seen some success with in detaining ghosts and other apparitions. The only problem was, anything placed in the chamber would explode, and since Garber couldn't be separated from Al Gore's head, the results would be messy. Since the FBI was unwilling to blow up the vice president, that left only one choice. The SCP Foundation had to find a way to turn American voters against Al Gore. It wouldn't be easy to do without attracting suspicion. In fact, it would be almost impossible unless they were able to put a man on the inside. Thankfully, just such a person presented themselves. During a meeting, the FBI delegates let the SCP Foundation members know that, while it hadn't been leaked to the press yet, George W. Bush was in a coma in the hospital after being hit by a stray bullet during a hunting trip. His body was relatively undamaged, but doctors had little hope of recovering his mind. At this point in the meeting, all the SCP personnel presented turned to look at Dr. Bright. He was going to be their inside man, whether he liked it or not. The Foundation visited the hospital where Governor Bush was being cared for and moved him into Foundation care before he could be pronounced dead. There, doctors finished patching up his body, and SCP-963 was applied, allowing the spirit of Dr. Jack Bright to take over his mind. Jack Bright, masquerading as George Bush, was now ready to run for office. The next step in the process was to start a disinformation campaign against Al Gore. There were a few proposed smear campaigns to be used against Gore. The first proposal was codenamed Tarbelly, a campaign that would have the Foundation blame Gore for the pollution of the water supply in a rural part of the developing world. This one was dismissed for being too outlandish. The next was Porky, which involved a rumor that Al Gore had once been caught in a compromising position with a pig. This one was dismissed due to not having access to convincing photo editing software. The third one was codenamed Star Wars, and it involved discrediting Al Gore by saying that he believed he was in contact with aliens. This was obviously shot down very quickly due to being a little too close to the truth for comfort. The proposal that was eventually settled on was codenamed The Other Monica, and the story centered around the idea that Monica Lewinsky was just an innocent patsy taking the fall for the person who Bill Clinton really had relations with, Al Gore. This rumor was the perfect combination of salacious and being just believable enough, making it the perfect thing to use to smear Al Gore's reputation in a country that still hadn't come around on gay rights. While Director Crow continued to refine prototypes for the technology that would allow the Foundation to interact physically with SCP-4444, the Foundation staged an early September debate between Gore and Dr. Bright posing as George Bush. The idea was to create a controlled atmosphere and mitigate any potential security risks. The debate was held in a church in Plainfield, Indiana, and moderated by Jim Leher. During the debate, Garber Gore did a lot of the talking for his human host, resulting in some utterly incoherent responses. When asked what makes him more qualified for the role of president than Governor Bush, Gore responded, "When you see someone sitting in that chair, you want to know for sure that they're the best ambivalent vicarious corncrake caliper available for the job. And you can be sure that a vote for Garber Gore is an underestimated vote for respectability, neutrality, lampposts." In the middle of the debate, an audience plant brought up supposed leaked photos of Al Gore and Bill Clinton engaging in their illicit affair. The crowd was understandably shocked, yelling and screaming in response. Now that the crowd was against Al Gore, Dr. Bright went in for the kill. He asked the people in attendance, "Do you want to see a strong man in the chair or a weak man under it?" At this point, something weird started to happen to the people in the crowd. They started full-on rioting, but then they started to change shape. In fact, the whole space started to shift. Al Gore stood up and started waving his arms, shouting, "Garber unacceptable addition convention terraform unto dark magicianship. Spell, spell." People rushed towards the exits, but found them blocked by the elongated forms of other members of the audience. At this point, the church was raided by both Foundation personnel and the FBI. Garber Gore fled from the scene, returning every attendee to normal as soon as they were out of Garber's line of sight. The debate was pulled from television, and anyone who watched it live was administered amnestics. Additional amnestics were administered to anyone who saw Garber Gore running through solid objects as he fled from Indiana to western Ohio, where he was found hiding in the loft of a barn. Meanwhile, Dr. Bright was punished by the Ethics Committee for his behavior during the debate, and agreed to act in a more professional manner for the October debates. Most of Al Gore's campaign team were undercover UIU agents who used audio editing to iron out some of the eccentricities of Garber's way of speaking before putting ads out. Most of them were able to be saved in the edit, but some were so off the wall they could never be shown to the public. In one of them, Al Gore stands in a field of cows and talks about how much greenhouse emissions are produced by farting cows. He then gives his solution to this problem, taping plastic bags over the backsides of every cow in America. Another rejected Garber Gore campaign ad that's much shorter but just as crazy features a video of a sleeping cat, with Al Gore narrating about how everyone should shave the backs of their heads. On November 7, 2000, election night, the SCP Foundation and the UIU watched the results with bated breath. If Gore won, they'd have to be prepared to use Director Crow's new vacuum nullifier device to simultaneously contain SCP-4444 and kill Al Gore. The SCP Foundation had killed public figures before, but never a president on the eve of his election. But then Florida started to tip in favor of Bush. After 2 days of recounting, despite losing the popular vote, Dr. Jack Bright in the body of George W. Bush was named President of the United States. The Foundation expected an outburst from Garber, but the entity remained silent. In fact, Al Gore has never displayed anomalous properties ever again. He conceded defeat graciously and more or less retreated from the public eye until the release of his film, An Inconvenient Truth. That wasn't the last the SCP Foundation ever heard of SCP-4444 though. On November 11, 2007, a mysterious broadcast aired on TVs across Gainesville, Florida that appeared to be a lost Al Gore campaign ad. It shows Gore sitting on a hill by the sea. In the distance, something large drops from the sky. Al Gore smiles and says, "I'm Al Gore, and I want to be your last American president." Supernatural monsters are on the loose. Practitioners of the arcane arts are here to bring about the end of the world. Sinister paramilitary forces are using paranormal objects to gain an edge over their enemies. In short, things are messed up. And when the anomalous is out of line, we all know that there's only one group you'd ever think to call: the FBI's Unusual Incidents Unit. What? Were you expecting someone else? Sure, they don't have the resources of the SCP Foundation. They don't have the strategy of the Global Occult Coalition. They don't have the ruthlessness of the Chaos Insurgency, or the arcane knowledge advantages of the Serpent's Hand. But they've got to have something, right? Right? Okay, maybe you're not convinced, but you will be. You may not respect them yet, but you'll change your tune when you find out that the Unusual Incidents Unit has dealt with one of the most important anomalies out there, SCP-001, or as the true experts over at the UIU call it, CA3, short for Confirmed Anomaly 3. If the evidence and files put together by the UIU are to be believed, and who are we kidding, of course they are, then they may have the answer to one of the anomalous world's biggest questions. How was the SCP Foundation actually formed? But before we jump into the mysteries of CA3, let's talk a little bit more about the real heroes of today's story, the UIU. This secretive offshoot of the FBI, America's premier domestic intelligence agency, was personally commissioned by J. Edgar Hoover during the Cold War. Why? For the same reason that literally everything happened in the US during the Cold War, to get an edge over the Soviets. Hoover was an extraordinarily powerful man in US politics, his tenure as FBI director spanning the terms of 8 different presidents. If he wanted to start a unit of agents whose sole job was investigating the supernatural, nobody would dare stand in his way. Everyone always talks about the nuclear arms race going on back in the 1960s, but far fewer people talk about the supernatural arms race that was happening at the exact same time. World War II coincided neatly with the 7th Occult War, an important geopolitical event that played a huge role in shaping the Global Occult Coalition, and a number of high-ranking members of the Nazi Party were believed to be key figures in this secret magical war. When the Soviets sacked a number of German cities as part of their offensive campaigns in World War II, they were able to bring back scores of anomalous items that the Nazis had been using to consolidate dark power. This didn't bode well for the United States government during the Cold War. After all, the only thing scarier to them than communists were magical communists. The US needed to build up its own anomalous arsenal, and that's where the UIU came in. The FBI allocated some of its okayest personnel to the task. Most were either agents who had experienced a paranormal encounter out in the field, or who were being punished for some kind of heinous mistake they'd made carrying out their duties elsewhere. Despite not being the best of the best, these agents sure were eager to get their hands on some cans. That isn't an innuendo, by the way. The Foundation refers to anomalies it deals with as SCPs, or SCPs. The GOC calls them parathreats, and the UIU calls them cans, again short for Confirmed Anomalies. Well, when it's an anomalous event or location, anyway. Anomalous objects like cursed books or supernaturally powerful weapons are referred to as carts or confirmed artifacts. And finally, anomalous people or sentient entities are referred to by the unfortunate name of Can Man. It may not sound as cool, but hey, it gets the job done just fine in the end. While the Unusual Incidents Unit may lack the knowledge, strength, resources, and even cred of its fellow groups of interest, that doesn't mean that it doesn't keep track of the others. In fact, the UIU has a pretty unique relationship with each of them. The GOC, for example, is nicknamed the Suits by the UIU. The official UIU orientation states that the suits outrank them, and if they're asked to follow an order by a member of the suits, they should just go ahead and do it. Same goes for members of the Fireworks, which is the UIU lingo for the Chaos Insurgency. Unlike the Foundation, which generally has the resources to go toe-to-toe with the Chaos Insurgency, the UIU are rightfully terrified of them. Official orders from the top are for UIU agents to do whatever they say, or they might find themselves getting shot in the head by a Chaos Insurgent, or worse. Next, the Cart Shoppers, also known as Marshall, Carter, and Dark, a sinister gentleman's club and auctioneer of anomalous items. Official protocol is to raid any deals being conducted by Marshall, Carter, and Dark, but oftentimes these raids are unsuccessful, because MC&D's security force are more competent fighters than anyone on the Unusual Incidents Unit payroll. On the other hand of the spectrum are the Can Collection, the official UIU nickname for the Serpent's Hand. UIU leadership recommends against their agents staging any one-on-one confrontations with them. Official memos also contain the phrase, if they give you an order, consider following it. They can probably set you on fire with their mind. And finally, the most important relationship of all is the one they have with the SCP Foundation. Much like the rest of the groups of interest on their roster, the UIU is subordinate to the SCP Foundation, their agents happily taking orders from them at the drop of a hat. They call the Foundation the Skippers, but don't let that casual name fool you. The SCP Foundation is so far above them on the pecking order that they rarely even communicate in any official capacity. When the Foundation talks to the UIU, it's always through code. They wouldn't dream of letting a hapless UIU agent helping them on any major operation, but lazier agents of the Foundation might occasionally outsource work to UIU agents. If ever one of these plucky feds receives a message starting with, "Hey Skipper," they can be sure they're about to have a low-priority anomalous case pawned off on them. The UIU are so subservient to the SCP Foundation that it has sometimes resulted in truly humiliating mix-ups. One high-ranking member of the UIU once took orders from a pizza delivery guy because he thought the pizzeria's name, the Spiced Crust Pizzeria, which could be shortened to SCP, was actually a coded plan sent by the Foundation to deliver a message, rather than a deep dish pepperoni and cheese. Incidents like this are why nobody takes the UIU seriously. But according to them, there was a time before all of this. That time ended on September 7th, 1954, when CA3, or SCP-001 as the Foundation would later call it, first appeared on the UIU's radar. It seemed to be the most standard can you could possibly imagine, an anomalous high school building causing a disturbance in the suburbs of small-town America. The UIU received the call after a number of students claimed the interior of their school suddenly looked completely different than it ever had before, despite there being no records of an official remodel. And we're not just talking about moving furniture and a new coat of paint either. The official CA3 file logs a number of changes. These include, but are not limited to, all the walls in the building becoming steel-reinforced concrete, all the windows being blacked out from the inside, all student desks, personal effects, textbooks, and any other standard equipment left inside the school simply disappearing in the night. The entire floor plan of the building seemed to have shifted, with rooms altering in both dimensions and location, as well as featuring seemingly random modifications within. None of this matched up with the building's original blueprints, which were obtained by the UIU shortly after the can was reported. But things got even stranger for investigating UIU agents. The building now contained 17 computers, each with state-of-the-art magnetic core RAM and advanced cybersecurity. For a suburban high school in 1954, it goes without saying that this was extremely impressive. But weirdest of all was the fact that a large and seemingly impenetrable steel wall had appeared in the auditorium, blocking it off and leaving whatever was taking place on the other side a complete mystery. Naturally, the UIU did what little they could to investigate the matter. The first investigation group they sent inside, Team CA305, never came back out, and Team CA306, the team they sent in to locate and retrieve the first team, also disappeared within the anomaly. Classic UIU expertise at work. Almost a month after discovery and initial containment, a strange noise began emanating from the auditorium. Shortly after that, the building became filled with people, all walking around and working at different operations. Eerily, everyone there had a resemblance to members of Team CA-306, the rescue team sent in to save the 12 members of CA-305, all of whom were still unaccounted for. 3 months later, the strangeness escalated. More noises came from the auditorium, and the anomalous people inside the building had gathered around the steel wall within. There was a hole in the wall 6 feet in diameter, and every 3 minutes for several hours, the people in the room would appear to simply pull an anomalous object out of it. The items were then carried away and placed in one of the many rooms that used to be classrooms before being locked up. The people within the building then seemed to start guarding these strange items. Others started performing tests with what seemed like far more advanced technology and methods than what was possessed by the UIU during the 1950s. What was going on here? A few days later, several armed guards exited the building and began guarding the perimeter. When UIU personnel attempted to lead an assault on these guards, they were quickly overpowered, even when advancing with vastly superior numbers. Whether this was due to the skill of the guards or the incompetence of UIU agents is still very much an open question. Though strangely enough, intel bleeding out from the inside confirmed that the people within were treating their anomalous items with UIU containment and testing protocols, which is consistent with the knowledge that CA-305 would have had. It seemed almost as though O5, or copies of O5, were creating a new splinter organization from within. And soon enough, it wasn't just confined to the interior of the CA-3 building anymore. CA-6, a can man that the UIU had been tracking outside the school, was suddenly kidnapped and shoved into a black car by 2 assailants, who appeared identical to Agent Dixon, a man who had been a member of Team CA-306. The black car then returned to the CA-3 facility and was allowed to enter into the complex by the armed guards. CA-6 was then removed from the car by the Dixon clones and placed into containment in one of the classrooms. It wasn't long after that the anomalous people within the CA-3 facility made direct contact with the UIU outside. They sent a message in Morse code on May 1st, 1965. The people sending this message identified themselves as the O5 Council, a name that seemed to be taken directly from the O5 recon team sent into the facility months ago. They identified the new organization that they just constructed within the confines of the CA-3 facility, the SCP Foundation. They just opened their very first containment site. This new foundation expressed the desire to become allies with the Unusual Incidents Unit, but sadly for them, it was essentially the last time they'd ever really be relevant. If this Foundation origin story is to be believed, and as with all entries under the title SCP-001, it's worth taking it with a healthy dose of skepticism. Then the UIU witnessed the birth of the organization that would quickly go on to outperform and overshadow them. A big win for humanity in the quest to secure, contain, and protect ourselves from dangerous anomalies, but another L for the UIU.
Roll up, come one and all. The circus is in town, and not just any circus. The greatest show in all the multiverse. Don't pay attention to the fact that the tents weren't here yesterday, or that you don't remember hearing anything about it before now. That's just the circus magic at work. And there's no circus more magical or more mysterious than Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting. It's a show so marvelous that even the SCP Foundation wants to get in on the act. So come watch the show, come feel the magic. After all, what do you have to lose? The story of this humbling traveling show begins in 1893 with the founder Herman S. Fuller. He was born into a wealthy family, and at the age of 21, he was invited by his uncle to Chicago to see the buildings his company had constructed for the World's Fair. He was dazzled by the sights he saw in the Windy City, and from then on he dedicated his life to finding a way to bring that same awe to people across America, and eventually, the world. After receiving a small loan from his uncle, Herman Fuller set about building the miraculous circus you see before you today. He knew he had to get a leg up over his competitors. After all, the 1890s were a golden age for traveling shows in America. So Herman devoted his time to research, trying to find acts and oddities that were truly out of this world. He learned the way between worlds, stole books from the Wanderer's Library, and with them studied alchemy, transmutation, sarcasm, and other supernatural disciplines.
That real magic and touch of the macabre would be what made Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting so special, and would ultimately give it its longevity. Herman Fuller's first anomalous acquisition was a genuine Fiji mermaid, like the one that famed showman P.T. Barnum kept on display around the same time period. Unlike Barnum's, however, Fuller's mermaid had been brought to life. The crowds loved it, but like all attractions, pretty soon crowds grew bored of it and hungered for the next strange sight. So Fuller went about acquiring more curiosities. His next important acquisition was the man with the upside-down face, or Manny for short. He serves as second in command to the ringmaster and manages things behind the scenes, including the acquisition of new talent. Many other anomalous beings and items were purchased for the circus by Fuller through the auction company known as Marshall, Carter & Dark, another group that the SCP Foundation makes a habit of keeping tabs on. Another thing that sets this circus apart from any others is the clowns, because they aren't like any you've seen before. Though Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting employs professional clowns, the vast majority of the clown troupe are non-human descendants of an extra-dimensional race of magical shapeshifters. Nobody really knows why they decided to come to our reality and help Herman Fuller set up his circus, but the leading theory is simply that they were bored. These original clowns are the progenitors of the turn clowns and the bread clowns. Turn clowns being humans who underwent a clown transformation procedure, and the bread clowns being artificially grown children produced by the other two types. Earlier in the circus's history, before we knew what we know today about genetics, much more barbaric methods were used to create new clowns. Young human subjects would be subjected to beatings and painful transfigurations at the hands of the circus's child breaker. These days, however, the circus no longer employs a child breaker. Instead, the creation of new clowns is the responsibility of resident clown breeder, Richard C. Normus. And before you say anything, don't laugh. That is his real name. Some of the most famous clowns in the troupe are Eugene and Pius, both of which are original clowns. Mr. Noodles, who is a bread clown, and Icky the troupe leader, who was once a human with magical abilities known as Veronica Mason. She still possesses her anomalous powers as Icky, and her magic act is one of the most beloved parts of our show. After the sudden disappearance of Herman Fuller, Icky inherited his position as ringmaster, and has been doing a spectacular job ever since. Not every attempt to create new clowns has been successful as Icky and Mr. Noodles, though. Some of the earlier attempts were quite grotesque to look at. Herman Fuller's troupe of clowns are an enthusiastic, happy-go-lucky, but occasionally violent bunch, capable of minor feats of reality bending that allow them to perform all manner of tricks. They live on a diet of mostly sugar and need to be milked regularly. Clown milk is an invaluable substance here at the circus, as it's the secret ingredient of the famous black cotton candy, which, by the way, is free with admission. It causes the brain to produce high levels of serotonin, meaning that when you eat it, you're primed to have a great time. Be careful though. Raw, concentrated clown milk is not for human consumption, though the clowns love to drink it. Even a small amount can cause a human to go into cardiac arrest due to an overload of happiness. The sound of calliope music also goes a long way to helping people truly get the most out of their visit to Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting. The calliope is self-playing and requires rolls of perforated paper to be loaded into it so that it can play a variety of pre-programmed pieces of music. Each piece produces a different psychological effect on visitors who have consumed their cotton candy. The skater's waltz will make them accept whatever they see at the circus, no matter how weird, as nothing out of the ordinary. Wonderful for making sure nobody blabs about their experience to a certain pesky foundation. Officer of the Year makes them less likely to perceive an event as unlawful. We use that one when we suspect the cops are closing in. Hail, hail, the gang's all here is used to get people to congregate at the big top for showtime. And American Patrol causes those who have eaten their cotton candy to seek out those who haven't, in order to strongly encourage them to have some. What do you mean you lost your dog is one that gets played after hours, when it's time to get the clowns ready for milking. Now that you have an idea of the history and how things work around the circus, it's time for the tour. The circus is made up of a series of tents and trailers, as well as a midway with standard rides and games that you might find at any circus. Outside of the big top, where shows are performed once a day, there's also the Den of Freaks and the Hall of Humans Extraordinaire. The Den of Freaks is home to fantastic acts like Sluggo and Eliza the Living Head. Sluggo is a man whose eyes are on stalks like those of a slug, and he can bend those stalks into any shape he wishes. He can even use them to create the shapes of human faces. Eliza the Living Head is a woman whose head lives independently of her body, which is safely kept in storage. Even without her body, she can speak and sing and often answers questions from the audience. The Hall of Humans Extraordinaire is home to performers who lack physical anomalies, but otherwise display otherworldly talents like the amazing Zoltan, a fortune teller and alchemist who Fuller picked up at a place called the Utterly Bizarre. The Hall of Humans Extraordinaire also used to be home to Icky the Clown, back when she was still Veronica the Magician. The recent lineup has changed quite a bit thanks mainly to the activities of the circus's constant enemy. You guessed it, the SCP Foundation. Or as they are better known to the stable of interdimensional clowns as the Miss SCP Foundation. The Foundation does not appear to be a fan of circus folk, and many of the former acts are now in their containment. For example, Madame Rezarta and her amazing palm reader, also known as SCP-1884-A and SCP-1884-B. Madame Rezarta was a blind Albanian woman in her 60s who was born without hands. She shared a psychic link with a creature named Luana, who was a large, shapeless entity made up of 932 hands. 929 of these hands appear to be those of an old woman and share Madame Rezarta's DNA, but the remaining 3 hands seem to be from a male Caucasian adolescent, an adult Hispanic female, and a Bengal tiger. Through her psychic link, Luana acted as Madame Rezarta's eyes, feeling its surroundings to provide her with a mental map. Fuller attempted to buy the 2 of them when they were 8 years old, but when their parents refused, he sent Manny to whisk them away under the cover of darkness. Madame Rezarta's act involved sending Luana to feel the faces of audience members, and then trying to describe their appearance based on what Luana felt. The act was a hit, but Madame Rezarta claimed to have been horribly abused during her time with Herman Fuller. The 2 of them escaped while on tour and were picked up by old SCP while trying to rent a hotel room in the UAE. Then there's Virtuoso, also known as SCP-1860. Virtuoso was once a book of sheet music that was transfigured by Herman Fuller into one of the circus's original acts. It's a tall, thin humanoid being encased in a densely woven paper-based material that stretches like nylon or spandex. It constantly drips black ink which it has a telekinetic control over. It uses the ink to create the shapes of musical notes, which float around it while it sings. Virtuoso can sing in multiple voices at once across different vocal ranges, and constantly performs arias and show tunes for whoever is listening. It was recovered from underneath a burnt-down shack at a fairground where the circus had been set up earlier. In Containment, Virtuoso still sings, but translations from Italian reveal that the lyrics of the arias it's singing have been changed to reflect its own situation. Some of these translated lyrics include, "One day I'll tell you of my creation and life within the circus, born from the ringmaster, his breed." Another act the circus dearly misses is Motormouth, also known as SCP-2094. He was one of the rare human clowns born in New York City in the late 70s. From birth, he displayed a supernatural level of flexibility in his lower jaw, and as he grew older, he discovered that he could swallow large objects and store them in a kind of pocket dimension until he needed them again. Unlike Madame Rezarta, he went with Manny willingly, as even at 8 years old, he knew that his alcoholic mother didn't care if he lived or died. Motormouth took to the circus like a fish to water, and grew from a shy child into a very talented, talkative, and highly charismatic adult. He was a juggler first and foremost, who would catch pins, balls, and knives in his mouth as part of his routine. But the name Motormouth came later in his career when he let a stunt driver drive a car off a ramp and down his throat. However, as great an act he was, a conflict arose between him and Manny over Manny's questionable methods of sourcing new acts. Manny found out that Motormouth had been helping some of the anomalous kids that Manny brought in to get back to their families. And as punishment for his insubordination, he was locked in a box and left behind at the end of a Japanese tour. The box was marked for Essie, because Manny thought being put in containment was the best punishment he could think of. With how strange and unusual its acts are, and how it always seems to pop in and out of new locations at strange and unpredictable times, you might wonder if the circus has any sinister motives. Well, the truth is, though sometimes the acts can be a little gruesome, their methods of acquiring new talent are a little unorthodox, and the clowns a little out of control. Their only goal is to entertain. In that respect, they're no better or worse than any other circus. So we hope you've enjoyed your visit. Make sure to stick around for the show, and don't forget to take your complimentary serving of cotton candy. Because there's nothing quite like a day at the circus, especially one like Herman Fuller's. Very few people would enjoy getting eaten by a bear in the woods. That would undeniably be an extremely unpleasant thing to happen to anyone. Heck, it's certainly enough to put a damper on an otherwise fun weekend of camping. But the one consolation of undergoing such a tragedy is that you at least know nature is taking its course. After all, bears live in the woods, and if you decide to enter their turf, there's an unwritten agreement that you'll just accept the consequences if a bear decides it doesn't want your company. It's another thing entirely if a bear eats you in your bedroom in the middle of suburbia, miles away from any nearby forest. That's the unfortunate fate that befell little Tommy Ellis. His parents heard the bellowing roar of a bear upstairs, the floorboards creaking under its sudden weight. What was happening up there? They ran upstairs, following the sounds of the roars and Tommy's horrible screams. But by the time they reached the bedroom, it was already too late. The room was empty, torn apart from within as a 600-pound grizzly bear crawled its way out of the destroyed bedroom window. Tommy Ellis was never seen again. To Tommy's parents, before they were given amnestic treatment by agents of the SCP Foundation, it was a freakish one-off tragedy. But to those very same Foundation agents, it was just another instance in a series of deaths so strange and random that only some kind of anomalous serial killer could be behind it. 2 months earlier in a nearby town, a family had undergone a savage attack from a full-size male silverback gorilla. The huge and heavily territorial animal tore the house apart and beat anyone who tried to stop it into a pulp. Much like a bear attack, being killed by an aggressive gorilla in the wild isn't that strange, but being murdered by a gorilla in the suburbs of Cincinnati is definitely a cause for Foundation intervention. However, the gorilla killer was long gone before any Foundation agents were able to intervene. At first, it was assumed that they were dealing with some kind of animal SCP, but as more grisly murders occurred, it began to paint a better picture of what exactly was happening here. Next, a family was found dead after what had seemed to be a brutal attack with an edged weapon, but this was no mere knife. All the evidence pointed to the weapon being a sword. Neighbors interviewed by the Foundation about the attack before their amnestic treatment reported hearing a frightening ruckus coming from the house next door, including a deep male voice saying, "I have the power!" Much like He-Man from the popular toy and animation franchise. This reminded them of another recent murder case where the killer also reportedly used a sword, though this time more likely a Japanese katana than a European broadsword, and was heard yelling, "Cowabunga!" as they left the scene. As the bodies racked up, the evidence kept piling on. A young girl was traumatized by a naked man suddenly appearing in her bedroom. This would be horrible enough, but there were a few strange details. He was handsome, athletic, had bright blonde hair, and no genitals. In fact, he matched the exact description of a child's Ken doll. And the thing that finally tied this whole bizarre case together was an entire family who was found to have been killed by electrocution, despite all being in different rooms of the house at their time of death, and showing no evidence of having been moved post-mortem. But the family's youngest, Steven, had a number of Pokemon cards and action figures in his room, prominently featuring the franchise's most well-known creature, Pikachu.
This shape-shifting, rampaging killer was caught not long afterwards when a full-size pony suddenly manifested in the home of another suburban family, thankfully causing no fatalities this time, and galloped off into the woods. Seeing as the Foundation was already keeping a close watch on the area to make sure they caught any more strange activity, they were able to quickly engage with and capture this strange entity. It was then sedated and sent back into containment at the iconic Site-19. The creature is now known as SCP-137. So you're probably wondering, what exactly is happening here? What are the anomalous traits of SCP-137 that appear to express themselves in such random and violent ways? Well, it may seem that 137's abilities are as diverse as they are dangerous. It actually only has one very simple anomalous power. It possesses the toys of children and transforms them into their real-life equivalent. A teddy bear became an actual bear. A stuffed gorilla became an actual gorilla. Toys of He-Man and a member of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles became murderous sword wielers. And Pikachu became a wild animal with powerful electrical abilities. The SCP doesn't appear to be inherently violent either. Its level of aggression appears to be in the eye of the beholder, as the attributes of the toys possessed by SCP-137 are defined by what a child perceives about said toy. For example, a pretend gun becomes a real one, capable of firing real bullets. Toys of dangerous animals become equally deadly in their real SCP-137 counterpart. Warriors and soldiers become powerful killing machines. However, this works both ways. Adorable or harmless characters remain equally adorable and harmless when SCP-137 possesses them. It seems as though the entity that possesses these toys doesn't even have a consciousness. It only takes up the mental attributes of its hosts. Incidentally, this was actually a crucial factor in devising the proper containment method for SCP-137 within Site-19. Through testing, the Foundation discovered that SCP-137's anomalous range is at least 250 meters, with a possible upper limit of 500 meters. In order to keep the creature in a consistent and harmless form, the Foundation forbids any unauthorized toy from being placed within the 500-meter radius of SCP-137. Essentially, the Foundation has boxed SCP-137 into a corner, meaning that any toy placed within its anomalous proximity is its only option. In this case, the Foundation has locked SCP-137 into a form of a wholesome princess doll, identifying itself as Princess Blossom. When asked about its identity in this form, the creature seems to have no awareness whatsoever of its anomalous nature. SCP-137 truly believes it is Princess Blossom while occupying this form, repeatedly asking interviewing researchers whether they're her prince finally coming to save her from this prison. Sadly for 137, her prince will never come, but perhaps she'll spend every day looking at her own cell door and hoping, being physically incapable of knowing any better. But of course, you're not here to engage with the heady existential realities of a shape and personality shifting anomaly. Like any reasonable person in this situation, of course, you want to hear about the experiment logs and find out just how far this entity's ability to anomalously take the forms of living toys can stretch. And don't worry, we won't disappoint you on that one either. SCP-137 has some of the most insane testing logs we've ever seen, and we're going to share them with you right now. The last one is a real doozy. First, overeager researchers made the terrible decision to introduce a toy plane into the testing chamber with SCP-137. How could this possibly go wrong, right? Well, here's how. The toy plane was possessed by SCP-137, which transformed into a full-sized F-16 jet. This jet then attempted to fly off while inside the testing chamber, resulting in it flying into the side of the chamber and exploding, causing a massive amount of damage to Foundation property. Whenever one of SCP-137's toy hosts is destroyed, it returns to being a toy. In this case, after the smoke cleared, a small cluster of broken plastic was laying on the floor. The researchers were then forbidden from testing any toys with jet engines or missiles, but they didn't tell them anything about toy race cars. It seemed these researchers really were children at heart. They were amazed when the toy car turned into a full-size Ferrari, then plowed into the wall at high speeds, exploding. Vehicle tests were suspended after this. The next test was actually kind of an accident. An attending agent had an amusing little keyring shaped like an alligator when entering the 250-meter range of SCP-137. You can probably guess what happened next. Because the key ring was technically close enough to a toy, SCP-137 took it over and transformed it into a 6-meter-long saltwater crocodile. It then lashed out, attacking and devouring nearby researchers. 14 were dead by the time Foundation security officers managed to safely enter the scene and terminate the crocodile. At that point, searches were intensified for all personnel intended on working in SCP-137's 500-meter danger zone. Next, an action figure of an American soldier, complete with a toy rifle. What do you think happened next? If you're guessing that this toy became a violent, full-size soldier that then went on to murder a number of Foundation employees before being taken out by several Foundation agents, then you can take any prize from the middle shelf. Just make sure you don't bring your prize too close to SCP-137, or disaster could strike again. After this, a toy police officer was possessed by SCP-137. He began by searching the testing facility for perps and encouraging the researchers to stay away from drugs. This seemed almost charming to begin with, until he pulled out his gun and murdered 2 researchers claiming they were criminals. He handcuffed a third before finally being terminated by Foundation security officers. After this, researchers on the SCP-137 project decided to veer away from testing on violent or dangerous toys, and instead brought in a stuffed panda, the sweetest and cuddliest of all bears. Everyone agreed that this would be a pleasant change when SCP-137 transformed into one of the big adorable beasts. One researcher, overjoyed at the presence of the panda, accepted a hug from it. The panda hugged far harder than anticipated, breaking 3 of the researchers' ribs. It was terminated by Foundation security officers soon afterwards. It turned out that the anomalous effects of SCP-137 also applied to non-sentient toys. For example, a box filled with Lego blocks became real terracotta bricks and construction materials. And a yo-yo, even when placed on a hook on the wall with nobody nearby, continued to perform sick yo-yo tricks with reckless abandon. The penultimate test performed on SCP-137 involved an action figure of a character known as Dr. Selenium, advertised as the smartest man on Earth. However, when SCP-137 transformed this into a real-life Dr. Selenium, the Foundation discovered that SCP-137 couldn't actually imitate more ephemeral qualities like incredible intelligence. This Dr. Selenium clone simply walked around, constantly talking about how intelligent he was rather than actually demonstrating that intelligence. He was probably the kind of guy who comments first on YouTube videos. And finally, the strangest test of all. The Foundation constantly needs to worry about moles and double-crossers in their midst. They have tests to figure out the presence of double agents working for groups of interest, like the Chaos Insurgency or the Serpent's Hand. But one group that they didn't have tests for were bronies, adult male fans of the cartoon My Little Pony based on the popular toy series. And it just so happened that one of the researchers on the SCP-137 case was indeed a brony. That's why he snuck a doll of the purple pony Twilight Sparkle into the testing chamber, causing SCP-137 to possess it and turn into the real thing. He engaged in a somewhat flirtatious conversation with the talking pony, leading to the pony offering to take the researcher back to her castle so they could hang out. After the testing session ended, the researcher was removed from the project and then reprimanded by his superiors for using an anomaly to fulfill his personal interests. But working at the Foundation is an incredibly hard job, with the risk of death lurking around every corner. So who can really blame a guy for wanting to hang out with his favorite cartoon character between sessions with 096 and 682?
Hey there, thrill seekers! Are you ready to get crazy? Are you ready to get extreme? Are you ready to taste the real hardcore? We here at SCP Explains know that you love a little excitement in your life. You're the kind of stone-cold solid gold bad dude whose idea of a relaxing afternoon is a staring contest with SCP-173. And you're so tough you're gonna make the peanut blink first. You're the kind of person who'd punch SCP-682 and make him apologize for grazing your fist. You wouldn't even back down from the Scarlet King himself, making the Monarch of Ultimate Despair say, "That's pretty cool, man. Respect." But if you want a genuine thrill ride, something that'll really put hair on your chest, you need to get your butt on a truly hardcore roller coaster. What? Too chicken? Afraid of a little motion sickness or something? Or maybe you've been freaked out by some of the so-called horrifying accidents that happened on roller coasters, like the 1972 Big Dipper disaster, or the 1986 Fantasyland Mindbender catastrophe. Get real.
When has a little death scared anyone at the SCP Foundation? And besides, nothing is more awesome than an extreme roller coaster. And believe us, any other roller coaster will feel like kiddie stuff compared to the absolute beast that we're gonna tell you about today. If you're a roller coaster novice, maybe you should try something like the Takabisha over in the Fuji-Q Highland theme park in Japan. This baby boasts a 121-degree drop, famous for making people fall out of their seats. Or maybe you want to try something like Yukon Striker over in Canada. This widowmaker of a coaster has floorless seats, a 360-degree flip, 4 inversions, and a 75-meter drop. That's a little too tame for your taste? If you're feeling really brave, you can hop on the King Ka over in the New Jersey Six Flags theme park. You'll get a super fast 90-degree climb, followed by a bone-stripping 139-meter drop, a 129-foot camel hump, and a 270-degree spiral. Ha! That'll give you a healthy dose of vitamin G-force. Why are we telling you all about this? Because compared to SCP-2183, all those coasters are like riding a tricycle with stabilizers in your mom's backyard. There's no coaster more powerful, more thrilling, and more adrenaline-pumping than SCP-2183. Let's take a look at some of the specs. You can find this bad boy in an undisclosed location somewhere in Idaho. This ride is so hardcore, the killjoys over at the SCP Foundation don't want you to ride it. But if the lamos over at the Foundation had their way, nobody would be having any fun. Am I right? Look at how they put the kibosh on the Carnival of Horrors, or as they call it, SCP-823. Anyone who wants to go on one of those rides will just have met the business end of a Foundation sniper rifle. And think about all the kids who've been deprived of the awesome childhood experience of Cragglewood Park, aka SCP-2571, because the Foundation party poopers decided to rain on everybody's parade. It's safe to say that if the Foundation wants to keep you away from it, you're gonna have a dope time with it. And the SCP-2183 roller coaster is no exception. They have the whole park blocked off and patrolled by at least 4 security guards at any given time. People who see this beast in action are given Class F amnestics, and they've spared no expense in suppressing anything about this coaster to end all coasters in the media. But trust us, getting a ride on this thing is totally more than worth getting on the SCP Foundation's bad side. That's right, this killer coaster has a max height of 37.2 meters and a max speed of almost 90 kilometers per hour. You can't drive that fast anywhere but the Autobahn over in Germany. Sure, it may technically be unfinished, but this bad boy still has a physical track length of 798.8 meters. You're probably wondering why we said physical there, right? That's because when it comes to SCP-2183, the real ride starts when the track comes to an end, baby. When the ride starts a-rolling, it blasts down the normal tracks like a bullet. But when the track ends and the carts fire off, they don't fall. No way. The carts keep speeding mid-air, continuing on the intended track from the roller coaster's initial badass blueprints. But that doesn't mean this ride does everything by the books. SCP-2183 is a ride that knows how to party. There's never any predicting the exact ride length, because every time the carts fire off the uncompleted section of track, they take a totally different path back to the start. That makes SCP-2183 officially the most unpredictable roller coaster in the entire world. The shortest recorded length of the non-physical section of track is 1,080 meters. That's almost double the length of the physical track. And the maximum length of the non-physical portion of the track has been 5,460 meters, which is over twice the length of the Nagashima Spa Land Steel Dragon 2000, the longest roller coaster in the world. But we know what you adrenaline junkies are thinking. It ain't just the length that gets a major buff, it's also the height and speed. Top recorded heights on the mid-air tracks have been up to 100 meters, making it the 5th tallest roller coaster in the world. And speeds have reached a face-melting 180 kilometers an hour, making it the 4th fastest roller coaster in the world. But maybe like Shania Twain, that don't impress you much. We get it. You're probably thinking, 5th tallest? 4th fastest? I thought you said this coaster was truly hardcore, SCP Explained. But like a good coaster, that's just because we haven't hit you with the big twist yet. That twist being, everything we just told you only applies to when the carts are empty. When someone is actually on this absolute monster of a roller coaster, it starts to do things you wouldn't believe. For you to really understand just how off the rails crazy this train can go, we've got to tell you about D93730, also known as the Rider. When the Rider woke up that morning, neither he nor the Foundation researchers handling him knew he was going to become a legend. As far as D classes go, this guy was actually pretty lucky, seeing that he'd been convicted of one of the less severe crimes that constitute D-class duty. He was actually part of a release program, allowing him to eventually exit the Foundation alive and return to a normal life after he'd been involved in a certain number of studies. It seemed like a pretty fair trade. However, this was a real pearls before swine situation. Any true coasterhead would relish the opportunity to take a joyride on SCP-2183. It'd be the greatest honor of their lives. But for the Rider, all it was a source of sweaty palms and an increased heart rate. Ha! Talk about weak sauce, am I right? He had no idea he was in for the ride of his life, in what would be both the first and last human test of SCP-2183. They sat him down on one of the carts, strapped and buckled him in with the safety bar, and got that baby rolling. When the ride began, the carts took the normal path down the physical portion of the track. But as expected, things got crazy when the carts hit the anomalous portion. Though nobody expected just how crazy this ride would get, least of all our lucky little rider himself. Ha! If he could still talk, I'm sure he would have changed his tune by now. The rider's cart detached from the rest during the mid-air portion and took a sharp right, going off on its own adventure around the rest of the abandoned park. Everybody knew this was going to be something special, because even the Foundation squares had never seen a cart act like this before. It looped around the whole place several times before whizzing through the park like a cruise missile, weaving between rides, stalls, and concession stands with ease. It was traveling blink and you'll miss it fast. This thing wasn't just white knuckle intense, it was broken knuckle intense. The rest of the carts returned to the starting point again and came to a stop, but the rider wasn't getting off that easy. There's a reason we call SCP-2183 the most intense roller coaster in this crazy world of ours. The cart containing the rider went AWOL, heading north out of the park at high speeds, putting it on a disastrous collision course with a nearby town. Well, disastrous if you work for the SCP Foundation. Totally awesome for the rest of us. The thing about a ride on SCP-2183 is that you really get your money's worth. When people nickname this thing the Ride Never Ends, they don't just do that for fun. This ride literally never ends. Over the first few weeks of the rider's ride, the Foundation just tried to suppress news of sightings from spreading. Multiple people around the nearest Idaho towns reported seeing a flying roller coaster cart zipping around the sky. Thankfully for the killjoys of the world, that kind of thing is easily written off as a trick of the mind. But this didn't stop the rider's epic thrill ride from tearing it up all across Idaho. Over the next few months, this party train really hit the road. Metaphorically speaking, of course. This cart constantly remained 120 to 150 meters above the ground and kept traveling at consistent speeds of over 200 kilometers an hour. That makes it roughly tied for the second fastest roller coaster in the world. The people lucky enough to spot this bad boy in action reported that they heard a panicked, terrifying screaming coming from inside the cart as it passed. That's how you know that the rider was having a hell of a time in there. Real shame that anyone who spotted it got a big old dose of Class A amnestics from the Killjoy Brigade. Speaking of those squares, the SCP Foundation tried multiple times to stop the ride and save the rider from this awesome experience. They sent in helicopters and lowered ladders down to him, but the rider, perhaps finally appreciating what a gift he was given here, kept his arms fastened to his sides, his face forced into a permanent grimace. Nobody knew how he could still be alive, despite having no food or water in all this time. Ha! We can only guess it's because SCP-2183 is just that awesome. Anytime these Foundation dweebs tried to get near the cart, it immediately undertook evasive maneuvers and got the hell out of there. Nobody could bring this ultimate ride to an end. In the end, the SCP Foundation proved they could take being anti-fun to straight-up military proportions. They approved firing a missile at this piece of coaster dream tech, hoping to finally bring its awesomeness to an end. After making a valiant effort to avoid them, the missile eventually struck the cart. They thought the rider inside was dead, but the cart kept flying for another 4 years before finally crashing 34 kilometers from the rest of the ride. Relatively unscathed, probably after crashing into one of those beefy Idaho pigeons. And as the Foundation would soon find out, the rider was still around too. He just wasn't in the cart anymore. Nope, he was suspended in the air in a seated position 124 meters above the crash carts. We call him the Rider, because he's still riding to this very day. And if anyone comes within a 50-meter radius of him in any direction, he'll just fly away until he's alone again. We don't know about you, but we think the Rider's whole permanent flying situation isn't a horrific purgatory of eternal torment if he's alive under his comatose state. It's actually the ultimate ride. And really, what more could you want out of life, right? Sometimes people working on the site see him sitting in the cars, often only for a split second. He's one with the coaster now. Total nirvana. Like we said before, kids, the ride never ends. Now go check out A Sea Snail's Fantasy, SCP-1867, A Gentleman, and SCP-5094, Miss J's WizKid Schoolhouse for more interesting safe class SCPs. Totally radical!